Hello, my name is Robel Gaither and welcome to my channel. So today on my channel, I am bringing you guys my second ever pattern tutorial. This is the second pattern that I've ever done. And this video and tutorial is so in-depth and thorough. It's almost annoying how thorough I went through every single step of the process. But again, with my patterns, I really want people to understand what it is that I'm doing and what they need to be doing to create the best bag from the pattern. So I'm gonna go ahead and show the bag that this pattern is for and that I made. So let's do that. So this is the tote bag that I made using the pattern, and it is so beautiful. Now I do want to make a disclaimer that the colorful pieces and the design for this is not included in the pattern, but I do show you in the tutorial or in this video how I did this, and if you want to do your own version and change it up and stuff like that. So I do show you the technique and how I do it, but it's not included in the pattern. I didn't want to include it in because I didn't want people to feel like they had to make this type of bag. It's just going to be for the tote bag bodies. The pattern is just for the body of the bag, and it does have two straps on here. It is a really nice size. It comes with a bottom support that you can add purse feet to. It's optional, you don't have to. And the inside, it does have a magnetic snap closure, and it has a zipper pocket back there, and I also went ahead and added a slip pocket on this side. So it's a really beautiful tote bag, really spacious, a lot of things that you can fit in here, and it's the perfect for on the go. That's why I call it the grab and go. And with this pattern, I'm gonna try to include written instructions. Now I don't know if I'm going to actually go through with that because I don't know how to explain myself well with written instructions, which is why I like to do videos, because I can be as thorough as I can, and I feel like I would have a hard time explaining what to do during written instructions. So if I do, they're probably not going to be as thorough and good to follow along as this video will. So I may or may not add those in. I'm going to try to just to kind of get in the process of doing written instructions and stuff like that. But I do recommend that everyone watches this tutorial for sewing this bag together. Like I said in the intro, this video is very thorough. I mean, when I tell you I go over every single step of this process of sewing this together, I'm not joking. Like, it's almost so annoying how thorough I went. So I am gonna have chapters and everything timestamped. So if you do have to skip through certain parts and skim through them, you can do that. I'm gonna have everything timestamped, and I'm also gonna have some links in certain things down below in the description box to other videos and things like that that I feel like can make this process of watching and learning how to sew this together easier. And again, I apologize if this video is too long. It's probably gonna be like 2.5 to 3 hours long, and I do apologize if people don't want to sit through that. I just feel like I have to explain everything, and I also wanted to do it that way so that, you know, if people who are a beginner, you know, it's good for them to know what to do. I explain stuff so a beginner can understand, but also to where someone who's seasoned in bag making can understand as well. And also, even if you just don't want to buy the pattern, if you're not even interested in sewing it and you just want to watch me make the bag, it's also very thorough, so you can watch me make it from start to finish. So I kind of hit all three of those marks. So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoy this tutorial in the video as well. Please make sure you give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below if you have any comments or questions that you want to leave down there. I am going to have some links below as well, and that's it. So let's get into the tutorial. All right, so once you buy and download the pattern, you can go ahead and open it up, and once you do, it should bring up like a file page like this, and you can kind of scroll through if you want and look at all the pages. It's a bunch of them. It should be a total of 22 pages. At the end, there are a few instructions and notes and things like that. Now, I don't have written instructions fully mapped out just yet. I may go ahead and add them in later on, but for now, it's not. So from here, you can just go ahead and print. So the settings that you want to have this for printing is you want to print it on 8.5 by 11 inch paper, so US letter, and I recommend using cardstock paper to print this on because it's just so much easier to work with, and in terms of tracing and just using a heavier weight paper, it's a lot better. So you want to have it set to US letter 8.5, and you want to also have it set for portrait. And then for here, if you're printing on a Mac, you want to go ahead and hit the scale option, and you want to scale it to 100%. Because I know on a Mac it automatically has it at 110, so you want to make sure it's scaled to 100%. Even if you're not using a Mac, you just want to make sure 100% is what it's scaled to, because if it's not, it's going to be printed way out of proportion. So that's one thing you want to make sure you definitely have. And then you also want to make sure you're printing it as a PDF. So if you see right here, mine is at a PDF, so you want to make sure it's printing at a PDF. So these are all the settings right here that you really need it to be set for. You can also go in and make sure everything looks good before you print. So once you have all your settings mapped out, you can just go ahead and print it from here. So now I'm going to go into all of the materials and stuff that we're going to use. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to talk about are the materials that we're going to need for this pattern. Some of them are optional and some are just ones that I would recommend using. So first up, of course, we're going to need cutting utensils. So I like to use separate scissors for separate things. So I have a few separate different cutting utensils. But another thing that I recommend that is optional, you don't have to, is a stapler. That's going to come in handy a lot. I'll kind of explain a little bit later on what I use a stapler for and things like that. And double-sided tape is another good thing. It's optional. You don't have to use it, but I would say it's going to make your life a lot easier. And then I'm going to be using a chalk pencil. You can use a fabric marker, whatever you like to use to mark fabric and things like that. It's going to come in handy a lot later on. And of course, you're going to need not marking utensils, measuring utensils, so rulers and things like that. You're going to need that. We're going to need some clips. I like to use clips when I'm sewing. You don't have to use clips. You can use binder clips, hair clips, pins, whatever you like to use when sewing. And then I am going to also, something that I recommend using that is optional, but I feel like it is really good. Sorry, I'm grabbing it right now because I didn't have it at first. But liquid stitch. This is amazing. You don't have to use it. It is a fabric glue that works really well for some parts. And again, it's optional. You don't have to use it, but I will kind of explain in certain parts what I'm using it for, where I'm using it, and you can kind of determine if you want to use it in your project or not. So these are kind of like basic utensils right here. Another thing that I'm gonna be using is Elmer's glue. I'm gonna be using this to actually assemble the pattern and kind of put it together. Also some packing tape, which is what I'm gonna use to assemble the pattern as well. So now I'm going to go into like hardware and thread and things like that. So let's do that. So for my thread on this bag, I'm using this really beautiful yellow bonded nylon Tex 70. You can use a higher Tex if you want. I personally just use Tex 70. If you don't want to use bonded nylon, you can use bonded polyester, whichever you prefer. And of course, you can use whichever Tex you want to use as well. I just personally use Tex 70. So I'm using this really nice yellow. And then for the zipper, which is optional because this is going to be for the interior zipper pocket. You don't have to do a zipper pocket for this bag, but if you do, you're going to want to use a number 5 zipper. I'm using this really cool green zipper tape with this antique brass coil, and it is a number 5 zipper. You want to make sure you're using a number 5. And this one is not a metal zip, it is a nylon. You can use a metal if you want. I just personally like to use nylon, and it is a number 5, so you want to make sure you do that. This bag honestly is really minimal hardware. You don't have to worry too much about too much hardware, but another hardware piece you're going to need is a 18mm magnetic snap. I do recommend using an 18mm for this one. You don't have to use a magnetic snap. You can use a regular standard snap and insert it however you want, but an 18mm snap is what you're going to need, whether it's magnetic or not. And then rivets. These are going to be optional. You don't have to use rivets, but I personally like to use rivets. It just makes the bag stronger and it has a nice look to it. So yeah, rivets, I like to use the double cap 9.2mm. The post can be however long you're willing to use. So yeah, I'm going to use these brass rivets. And again, these are optional. You don't have to use it, but you'll be able to see what parts of the bag I use rivets for, and you can kind of determine if you want to use that as well. And then another thing too that is optional, you do not have to use them, are purse feet. I said I wasn't going to use them, but I might do purse feet just to kind of show you with the pattern how it works and stuff. But these are just little flathead purse feet. These are ones that I like to use. You can use the regular, you can use whichever purse feet you like to use. I just personally have a bunch of flathead ones. So yeah, purse feet is optional. Again, you do not have to use this, but if you do, that would be something you're going to need as well. Now let's move on to the actual materials. So you're going to need a exterior fabric, which is what's going to be made up of your actual tote bag, the exterior. So I'm going to be using this really nice dark blue denim. I love this denim, it's amazing. So I'm going to be using this for my exterior. And then for my lining, I'm going to be using this really nice bright green lime green waterproof canvas. Now this is waterproof canvas. It's waterproof. I like it. It's really sturdy for the lining of my bags. I typically use waterproof canvas for all the linings of my bags. You don't have to use waterproof canvas. You can use whatever you're comfortable using, whether that's cotton, whether it's vinyl, whatever your personal preference is, you can use. But you're just going to need an exterior fabric and an interior fabric. If you want your exterior fabric to be the same as your interior, you can do that as well. You can play around, but you're going to need an interior and exterior fabric. And then moving on to the interfacings that I'm going to be using, and then some that I recommend you use for this project as well. So first up is Woven Fuse 2. This is a woven cotton interfacing. It is amazing. I love this. This is what I typically use to fuse as a base layer of interfacing on the back of all my pieces. And for those who don't know, interfacing is what's going to give your bag shape and just a nice structure and quality to it, especially when you're using, you know, like a lighter ounce fabric. So this is Woven Fuse 2. If you do not have Woven Fuse 2, I know there is oh, I'm blanking on the alternatives, but there is Fuse. There is Wawak has one that's called Profuse, I want to say. And then there's it's SF101. So SF101 is a really popular alternative to Woven Fuse. So if you have that, you can use that as well. And again, it's just a cotton woven interfacing and you fuse it to the back of your fabric. And then another interfacing that we're going to need is Decovil Heavy. This is a heavy, it's not a heavy one, but it's a pretty durable interfacing. And this is really what's going to give the bag shape. So this is what is mostly going to be used on the body of the bag for interfacing. If you don't have Decovil Heavy, there are other alternatives. Again, I don't really know many alternatives for Decovil Heavy, but I know there's Pelon 71F. There's that you can use, but that's more beginner friendly. I honestly recommend using Decovil Heavy because the quality of it is just really good, and it's just really good quality. And then the other interfacing, which you're really not going to need much of, it's literally the same as Decovil Heavy, but it's just a lighter version. This is called Decovil Light. You're barely going to need any of this, but I do recommend having this for the pattern as well, and it does kind of cost for it. So Decovil Light, Decovil Heavy, and then Woven Fuse 2. Those are the interfacings that I'm going to be using. But yeah, so let's move on to assembling the pattern. All right, so once you get your pattern all printed out, it's going to print out the pattern in pieces because this pattern is a lot bigger than my last pattern. So this one you have to piece together, and it's really not as difficult or as scary as it seems. I'm going to show you the way that I like to piece my patterns together. It's really simple and easy. And there's 19 pages. They're each numbered stuff. But before you do anything, the first thing you're going to want to do is on the first page, there are two boxes. One says 2.5 by 2.5 centimeters, and this one says 1 inch by 1 inch. You want to take a ruler. So I am going to measure this one and make sure that it's 1 by 1 inches, which it is, and all that's going to do is let you know that you printed this to scale at the right size that it needs to be. So now that this is the right size, to piece this pattern together, I'm going to show you what I like to use. So I'm going to use a Elmer's glue stick. I like to use this. It helps to hold the pieces together. And then I'm going to use a pair of scissors and packing tape. Now you don't have to use packing tape. You can use regular clear tape or whatever tape you have on hand. I personally like to use packing tape because I think it's a little bit stronger. So there are triangles on each page where they're going to be joined, and there's also A1, A1. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to line up A1 to A1, and this has A2. You're going to line up A2 to A2, and then this is A3. You're going to line up A3 to A3, and so on and so forth. Literally, it's like putting together a really big puzzle. The pages are all numbered too to make this easier. So what I like to do is if I have to merge these two sides together, I typically like to cut one side down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pattern, and when you're cutting this, you want to cut directly on the outside of this line. You don't want to cut on the inside. You want to cut right on the outside. So I'm going to cut directly on the side of this line, and it's really simple, nothing too crazy. Okay, so as you can see, I cut straight up to the edge on the outside of that line. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my glue stick, and I'm just going to put glue all on this side. And I like to use glue because it helps to hold this pattern piece down, and it just makes it a little bit more simpler. So there's glue on this side, and then I'm just going to take this pattern piece and lay it directly on top of this. And if you need to, what I like about using the glue is that you can kind of adjust it and move it around to line it up perfectly. You want to line up the triangles as best as you can. Let me show this a little bit up close. So there's this black line right here, and there's a little bit of the black line on this page. You want to make sure that you're lining them. I don't know how to explain this. You don't want to line them up directly on top of each other. You want to put them side by side, if that makes sense. I'll kind of show you once I have it on. Sorry, I hate when I feel like I'm not explaining things. nicely. So you'll kind of be able to see it still has a black line. So essentially, you know, you're not overlapping them. You're just kind of laying them side by side next to each other as close as you can. And you want to make sure that it's lined up. And you can tell it's lined up when it looks like a full diamond triangle. And you'll be able to also tell from the two lines. So I really, really hope that that makes sense. And after I do that, I'm going to actually adjust this piece down here to make it a little bit closer. And again, this is why I like using the glue, because you can just adjust it and move the lines if you need to. So now that I have that, typically what I like to do is I like to take a piece of tape and just stick it right down on this seam. And this is just going to help to make things more durable and sturdier as a pattern piece. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut on the outside of this line, attach it to this, line it up, and I'm going to do the same thing for here and all the other pieces, and then I'll show you kind of how to line up the bottom parts as well. So let me go ahead and do this and then I'll check back in. Okay, so I went ahead and pieced all 5 of these pages together in the first row, and it's one long big piece of paper now at this point. And I want you to notice how I haven't cut out any pattern pieces yet. We're not cutting any pattern pieces out just yet. We want to have everything kind of mapped out. So I have the first row together. So essentially I'm going to do the same exact thing for the second part. So I'm going to cut along this one, piece it together, cut along this one, piece it together, and it's going to end up being another long row. And then I'm just going to cut across the top once it's one long row and glue it to the bottom of this. So I'm going to piece this bottom row together, and then I'll come back, check in, and show you how I'm going to piece both of them together. It's essentially the same thing, but I just want to kind of show you, because I don't want anyone to get kind of confused, because I know it can be a little confusing. So again, you just want to take B1 and match it up to the B1. You're going to take the B2 and you're going to match it up to the B2. And then just to make it easier too, if you need to, again, the pages are all numbered, so you can just go 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. It's 5 pages in a row. So I'm going to go ahead, piece all this together, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do next. Okay, so now I have the second row all put together, and it is now another big piece of paper. So essentially what we're going to end up doing is kind of merging these two together. So I like to cut the top part of this kind of the same how literally it's the same way that I cut the sides off. I'm just going to cut the top part of this, and I'm going to cut on the outside of this line once again. So you're not going to cut under this side, you're going to cut right on the outside on the top of this line. Or if you want, you can cut the bottom one on this one, whichever one you want to do. I typically just do it this way. So let me zoom in so that you can kind of see this easier. All right, I hope you can see this good. So I'm just going to cut straight across on the outside of this line all the way on the top of this. And you definitely want to make sure that you're cutting carefully, because it definitely does make a difference. And another thing too that I want to say that I don't think I did yet, when you're aligning your pieces, you want to make sure your lines line up, like this line and that line and this line. You want to make sure it lines up all the way across. And that's how you know that all of your stuff is aligned perfectly. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut all the way across on this, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do next. Okay, so I went ahead and cut all of the top of the bottom portion off, and now you can see if I were to lay it across, essentially it would all create big pattern pieces right here. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did when I was paneling the rows together. So I'm just going to take my glue stick and I'm going to put glue all along this bottom piece. So once I have my glue on the bottom piece, I'm going to try to do this as quickly before this glue starts drying. I'm going to line up the triangle pieces to make them diamonds. And again, you want to make sure the lines are lining up as well, because that is crucial. And two, again, you know, with the glue, if you don't have it lined up perfectly, you can kind of slide it and adjust it and move it around. That's the good thing about using the glue for this portion. So take your time and just kind of line it up, adjust as needed. You just want to go all the way across. And honestly, once you kind of line some edges up straight, it should be pretty smooth all the way around. Sometimes you will have to kind of slide a piece to kind of get it to line up right, but it should be pretty smooth sailing. All right, so now that this is glued down, we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing. We're gonna take some tape and tape it all the way across on that seam, just to hold everything together. I hope this piece is long enough, which it is. So we're just gonna stick this down. And bam, we have so far the tote bag body exterior put together. For an interior pattern piece, we also have the tote bag decovil interfacing piece, and then this is something else that needs to be pieced together. So you just want to go ahead and do the same thing all the way around. You want to make sure that you're matching up the pieces for the sides like that, bam. And then this one, as you can see, it is going to match up with this. So you're going to match it up B8 and C1. So the best thing that I recommend doing is kind of paneling the rows together first and then attaching it to whatever bottom or top piece that you have to, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this together, and then I will check back in. If there's anything else that I feel like I might need to kind of add and explain about this process of putting it together, I will check back in. But it's really easy. It's not difficult at all. Again, the lettering is all there to line it up, and you want to make sure all your lines match up. And yeah, so I'm gonna do this, and then I'll let you know what's next. Okay, one last part that I wanted to show for this on piecing it together is, so since you can see this piece has to be merged with this top part, but none of the other pieces do, a way to make it simpler is what I like to do sometimes is just kind of do a rough cutout of the part that has to be merged. And then I can put this to the side. And then now all I would have to worry about merging is this top part. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing, cut this part off, add glue here, line up the diamonds, make sure all my lines match up, and then add tape. And then it just makes it easier so that I don't have to do all of that for pieces that don't have to be merged. So I just wanted to kind of give you that tip as well. So yeah. Okay, so now I have my last few pattern pieces put together, and once you have everything all put together, it should be a total of 8 pattern pieces. So now that all of this is mapped out, we can go ahead and start cutting our pattern pieces out. So I'm going to start with the smaller pages actually first, just to show you. So when you're cutting out your pattern, you want to make sure you're cutting on the outside of each pattern piece, and you want to make sure you're cutting as best as you can, because it definitely does make a difference. So I'm going to show you up close again. You want to cut on the outside of this line. You do not want to cut on the inside of it. So we're just going to cut directly on the outside, and it's really simple. All the pattern pieces for this bag are straight edges and lines. You don't have to worry about any curves or anything. Also, make sure, I'm only doing this to show up a little bit more up close. Make sure you do not cut your pattern pieces or paper or fabric in the air. Always make sure they're cutting on a flat surface. So yeah, you just want to make sure you're cutting on the outside edge of each pattern piece. Really simple. I'm going to go ahead and cut all of these pieces out, and then I will show you what is next. And before I go again, another thing that I want to say, because I literally just made this mistake myself, you want to make sure you're cutting on this thicker outside line. You don't want to cut on the inside of the thinner line. You want to make sure you're cutting on the outside of the thicker line. I just made the mistake and did that. So don't be like me. Don't make this kind of mistake, because now I got to tape this back. So now I have all of the pattern pieces cut out, and I went ahead and made a slight change. So instead of there being, what did I say, 8 pattern pieces, it's now going to be 7. So I accidentally made a mistake, and for some reason I did a brain fart and made the facing piece 2 separate pieces when really it should be 1. So I went ahead and changed it, and this is how it's going to look. So it eliminated having this extra piece. So now it's just 7 pattern pieces. So there's going to be the interfacing pattern piece for the body. We're going to have the interfacing piece for the bottom support. This is the zipper pocket, which is also optional. You don't have to add this. I'll explain a little bit later on, but this is a zipper pocket for the interior. This is the bottom support. This is the tote bag strap. We have the slip pocket, which is going to be on the inside, which is also optional. You don't have to add it, but it does make it nice. And then this is the actual body piece. So I'm going to go ahead and go over all of the markings that are on the pattern. So I do have grain lines mapped out on here so you can know which direction of the fabric you're supposed to be cutting it on. And then there's also some marking holes on some of the pattern pieces, which is only 2 pieces that have the marking holes. It is the main body piece and it is also the bottom support. So I added these holes right here, not holes but circles, and this is, you're going to punch holes where the circles are. So if you did want to add purse feet on this bag, it is optional, you don't have to, but if you did, as you can see, there's little circles and it says purse foot right there. So you would punch holes on all of the circles, and essentially what that would be is your template for when you go to cut out your fabric. You would lay this on top of it, dot little markings, and that's where you're going to punch the holes to put your purse feet, if you did decide to do that. It's optional, you don't have to, but it is there for in case you want it. And this hole is going to be for the magnetic snap closure. So you're going to punch a hole where this is, and this is where you're going to lay on top of the actual lining, and then you're going to mark that out on both of the sides, and that's where the magnetic snap is going to be to close it. So that's what those markings are. There's also some seam allowance markings, so it says 3/8 inch, 3/8 inch, 3/8 inch, 3/8 inch. This is just letting you know what seam allowance is needed on what part. So there's a little different. So like here it says fold over a 1/2 inch. This is because we're going to be hemming this piece, and it's going to have a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And then this says right here for this slip pocket, it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance at the top and a 3/8 inch on the side. So it may seem a little difficult now, but when I'm explaining as we're going, it's kind of just a little guide so you can go back to sometimes in case you forget, oh, what seam allowance goes here, what seam allowance goes there. So I just wanted to go in and explain that. So essentially the pattern is really done and put together and ready to go. So now I'm going to show you how to cut all of these pieces out, which is really simple. So let's move on to that part. So for the exterior, when you're cutting out your fabric, what I like to do is to go to the reverse side of the fabric. I typically use denim, so I work on the reverse side. For cutting out the exterior, you're only going to need to work with 3 pattern pieces. So on your pattern pieces, it tells you exactly what it's for. So this says tote bag body, cut 2 exterior and 2 lining. So we're going to cut 2 with this pattern piece. We're going to cut 1 of the exterior of the bottom support, and then we're going to cut 2 of the tote bag straps. So what I like to do, it's really simple and easy. Again, I like to work on the reverse side, and I like to trace my pattern pieces. I actually recommend tracing because it's a lot easier to get better cuts and shapes that way. So I'm going to use these weights. I kind of use them as like little pattern weights to kind of hold the pattern down while I trace out my piece. So I'm going to put these little 5-pound weights on here, and then I like to use a regular pin. This is what I use, and essentially what I'm going to do is just trace around the whole outside of this pattern. And this is why I completely recommend using cardstock, because it is so much easier to trace with cardstock because it's thicker, and it won't bunch up or fold or anything, and it's really easy to trace around. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and trace around this, and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so I finished tracing it out. So this is what it's looking like. I did kind of miss a few spots, but it's really easy to just kind of go in and connect the lines. So this is what the main body piece is looking like. And you really don't need a lot of fabric for this project. It's a really simple pattern to make. So again, you need to trace 2. So 1 for the back and 1 for the front. So I'm going to go ahead and trace another one of these. And I'm also going to do the same thing for all of the other pieces. Okay, so I went ahead and traced out my 2 straps, and now I'm going to go over how to cut these pattern pieces out. So since when we traced the pattern piece onto the fabric, since we traced on the outside of the pattern, you want to make sure when you're cutting this out, if you traced it, you want to cut on the inside of this line so that it is the exact pattern piece measurement that you need. Because if you cut on the outside, it's going to add a little bit more allowance than what you need, and it's going to make the pattern piece a little bit bigger. So you want to make sure you're cutting on the inside, directly on the inside of this line, and it's going to give you the exact pattern size that you need. Now if you want, you can use a rotary cutter to do this. Typically I do too, but I'm just going to use scissors today. So I'm just going to go and cut again on the inside of this line. And you want to make sure you're cutting as neatly as possible, which is typically why I would use a rotary cutter. I don't know why today I'm feeling like I don't want to use one, but I just don't, and I probably should. But yeah, you just want to make sure you're cutting on the inside and you're cutting as neatly as possible, because the neater you cut, the better the pattern piece. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and do the same for all of these pieces. I'm just going to cut them all out again, making sure to cut on the inside of this line. And I'm going to check back in and let you know next what we're going to do. So I went ahead and cut out the pattern pieces. So again, we have our two exterior pieces, which is one's going to be the front, one's going to be the back. I have my bottom support, and then I have my two straps. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start cutting out the lining. So let me grab my pieces. So this is the waterproof canvas. It is the reverse side that I have up right now. So the pattern pieces that we're going to be doing for the lining are the tote bag slip pocket. It says cut 2 for the interior. The same pattern piece we use to cut the exterior, because we have to use it to cut 2 for the lining, and then we have to cut 2 for the zipper pocket. Now again, the zipper pocket and the slip pocket are optional, but if you want to add a little bit of oomph to the inside of your bag, like a little bit of bam, I definitely recommend adding those in there. I always love adding in a good zipper pocket and a slip pocket. So I'm going to first trace out my zipper pocket pattern pieces. Literally, it's the same exact thing that I did for the exterior. I'm just going to take my pattern piece, put it on here. I'm going to take my weight, grab my pin, and I am just going to trace the exterior. And it says that I need to cut 2 of this. So I'm going to cut 2. I have to cut 2 of actually all of these pieces. So I'm just going to keep tracing these out. And once I have these traced out, I'm going to do the same thing, cut on the inside of the line since I am tracing on the outside of the pattern. So I'm going to go ahead, trace these out, cut them out, and then I will show you what we need to do next. Okay, so I went ahead and finished cutting out all of my interior pieces. So I have 2 of the pieces for the zipper pocket, 2 separate pattern pieces. 2 for the slip pocket, and then I have 2 for the front and back lining piece. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to get ready and cut out my woven fuse interfacing for my exterior fabric. So again, I'm using woven fuse. This is just a fusible cotton interfacing. You do not have to use this. You can find alternatives, which SF101 is a really good one, and ProFuse. I want to say ProFuse or SoFuse is one that's also really good that a lot of people use as well. And this is just what I use as a base layer before I sew my decovil heavy and decovil light interfacing onto my fabric. It just gives it a good, nice foundation. So the way that I like to cut out my interfacing for this is I do not use the pattern piece to cut this portion out. I literally just take the body piece or whatever piece that I'm going to be interfacing, and I just do a rough cutout. And the reason why I do this is because I use a heat press for my facing. And when I go to press the plate down, if I have a pattern piece that's cut exactly to the piece of this, it will slide and move around and it won't fuse all the way onto the fabric. So I just cut a big piece, fuse it to the back, and then I cut the excess off. So if you want to do that, you can, or if you're going to be using an iron and you don't feel that, you know, using a heat press, you would have that, you wouldn't have that issue of the interfacing sliding, you can go ahead and just use the actual pattern piece for the body, exterior body piece pattern for this, and cut out pieces of your interfacing if you're going to be using an iron, or you can still do it this way. Sorry if I'm talking like way too much. I'm just trying to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. So yeah, the only pieces that you're going to need this interfacing for is the front and back body exterior, and for the bottom support, because those are really the only pieces that are going to be getting fused with Decovil. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish cutting that out, and then I'll check back in and let you know what I'm gonna do next. Okay, so now I'm at my heat press where I'm going to fuse the woven fuse to the back of my fabric. And I have these pieces of parchment paper laid down so that the interfacing doesn't stick to the heat press. So again, I cut my interfacing bigger than my actual pattern pieces. So now I'm just going to lay them like this, and I'm going to press it to the back of the fabric. Now, if you don't have a heat press, I think you can use an iron with woven fuse, and you probably want to hold it down for 15 seconds and kind of move it around until it's all fused. I cannot say for sure because I'm so used to using a heat press with it, but I know you can use an iron. You probably just want to hold it for 15 seconds while you're pressing it. So this is now pressed, and I'm going to do the same thing for the front and the back pieces. Again, this piece that I just did is actually the bottom support. So now I'm going to grab the front or back, whatever I make this piece. And since this piece is a lot bigger than the plate on this press, I'm gonna have to move it around a few times to actually hit all the spots. So yeah, this is typically what I do when I am fusing my woven fuse. And yeah, I'm gonna fuse this on, and then I'll check back in and let you know what I'm gonna do next. Okay, so I have my woven fused to the back of all of the exterior pieces that need the facing to it, which again is the bottom support and the front and back body pieces. So again, like I said, I'm just going to cut the excess off. So if you did it this way as well, you're going to want to go ahead and do the same thing. So all you have to do is just go ahead and cut around, and you want to make sure you're cutting as close to the edge of your exterior as possible, but you want to make sure you try not to cut into your actual fabric, if that makes sense. So you're just going to trim the excess all the way around. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut these off, and then I'll let you know what we're going to do next. All right, so now that you've cut off the excess interfacing, or now that I have, this is what it's looking like. So the front of the fabric is the denim, and then the back is the woven fuse that I fused on. And again, it was just me cutting off the excess because fusing it that way is easier for me. So now what we're gonna go ahead and do is we're going to draw our guidelines, which our interfacing is going to sit inside of. So you're gonna wanna take a ruler, preferably one that's see-through. It's a little bit easier to use. So what you're going to do is you're going to draw lines you're going to draw lines that are a ½ inch away from the edge all the way around. So you're just going to draw lines ½ inch away from the edge. And this is really easy, nothing difficult at all. And again, this is where your interfacing is going to sit inside of, because you do not want to sew interfacing inside of your seam allowance, because it's going to make your seams extremely bulky. So these guidelines are going to help for when you fuse the facing to know where it's supposed to be fused inside of. And the pieces for the interfacing are a lot, well, not a lot smaller, but they are smaller than the exterior, so that they do comfortably sit inside of these guidelines that we're putting right now. So again, these are ½ inch lines that you're doing all the way around. I am almost done drawing this one, and then I'm going to finish up the other one and show you what to do for the bottom support. Okay, so for the bottom support, you want to do a ½ inch around as well. So you're going to do a ½ inch on the sides, tops, and bottom. And with this one, we're actually going to be hemming the sides. So this end and this end is going to be hemmed in a ½ inch. So I'll show you a little bit later on when we get to that step what I mean by that. So yeah, just a ½ inch around on all of your pieces that are fused with the facing. And I'm going to show you what to do next. So typically what I would do next is cut out the decovil heavy that I'm going to be using to fuse to the back of this. But I am going to do my own little design on here, and I'm going to applique it on. So I cut out a bunch of these really cute shapes that I'm going to put on the bag. I have like these really cute, funky little shapes. I don't know why I've really been into weird shapes. So I'm actually going to do my own little applique of these pieces on, and it's just going to give it a really cool look and just kind of elevate it. And this is actually not part of the pattern. This is just my own design. It's something that I'm doing. I am going to show you the technique that I'm going to do. If you are interested in doing your own little thing, you can add hearts to the bag. You can do cool little shapes and things like that with this technique. I'm going to go ahead and applique these on first. And when I do applique, I typically like to do it before I fuse my decovil heavy on, because my domestic machine that I do my zigzag stitching on cannot handle all of the thickness with the interfacing already on there. So I do my applique and then I fuse my decovil on. So I went ahead and already mapped out where I want all of my pieces to go, and this looks so dope. Again, if you're not interested in this part of this process, you can skip to the next part. Again, this is not part of the pattern. So what I'm going to do is, this is one of those parts where liquid stitch comes in handy. So I'm going to take my piece and I am going to just put some liquid stitch, oops, on the back of it like this. And this is going to help this piece lay and stick to the actual fabric so that I can go and zigzag stitch this on. And it's really easy, nothing too crazy. I'm using a wooden stick just to kind of spread the glue evenly. And then I'm just going to go and stick, oops, I don't want to get on the table. I'm going to stick this down to where it is supposed to go. I don't want to mess this up. Ooh, I'm getting glue on the actual fabric. Okay, so I'm sticking it down where it goes. And yeah, so essentially I just tack down all of the little color pieces first, and then I come over to my machine and zigzag stitch them on. So I'm gonna go ahead and, I don't know if I'm gonna tack the rest of these down first or what I'm gonna do, if I'm gonna do them one by one. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and figure out what I'm gonna do, and then I'll show you how I actually attach these on, so that if you wanna do your own little design. All right, so I'm now at my domestic sewing machine, and essentially the settings that I have on my machine are my stitch is set to a zigzag, my length is set to the buttonhole stitch setting. So if I could maybe move this over so you can see, my length is on the buttonhole stitch setting, and my width is at 4. So that is the setting that I'm using to applique these little pieces on. And it's really easy, honestly. It's nothing too difficult at all. All you do is literally center the foot in the center where the overlay piece meets and the actual denim meets, if that makes sense. I really hope it does. And then literally you just go, I'm gonna go really slow so that I'm not going too fast, because I don't want to mess up the stitching, especially on the curve. So I'm just gonna go really slow. And it's not looking how I want it right now. Sometimes I have to go over it more than once. But really, you kind of want to let the machine do all the feeding. You don't want to push it too much. Kind of just let the machine do all the guiding. And yeah, so I'm just gonna keep doing this, and sometimes I'll go around it more than once. I'm using a black thread just to give it a nice contrast. So I'm gonna do this, and then I'll kind of check back in and show you what I'm up to and what's going on. So yeah. So I went ahead and sewed down the first rows, and I just wanted to kind of do a more closer up and show you a little bit more of what I was talking about, because I don't know if I really did a good job explaining in the last clip. So again, like I said, I just center up or line up the edge of this fabric with whatever edge it ends with in the center of the foot, if that makes sense. You can kind of see what I'm talking about here. It's like in the center of this foot. And then I just sew. I try not to go really fast. I try to keep it more on the slower side. And it can be a little difficult, especially around curves, but I just kind of try to take my time. And yeah, I kind of just wanted to do a better explanation up close to show you what I was talking about. And then you can kind of see this is what it's looking like. So that's what I'm doing. All right, so I now have my pieces all appliqued on, and it actually came out really amazing. I love how it looks. So this is the front, and then this is the back. So now that I have this done, I can move on to actually cutting out my interfacing to fuse. Again, I already mapped out my guidelines for where the interfacing is going to sit inside of. And if you are someone who decided to do your own version of applique, I have noticed when I do applique sometimes that it will shrink the exterior fabric a little bit. So sometimes the interfacing pattern piece, when you cut it out, it may not fit 100% perfectly in the guidelines. And if that does happen, all you have to do is cut it down a little bit. I don't ever find that it actually affects the actual outcome of the bag. It typically shrinks it equally on both the pattern pieces. So that's just something that I noticed. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to cutting out the interfacing. So let's do that. All right, so this is the interfacing that I'm going to be using. This is the Decovil Heavy. It is what I recommend for this pattern. If you don't have Decovil Heavy and you have an alternative that you're more comfortable working with that is a heavy backing or interfacing, you can use that. You can just use whatever works well for your project and that you're comfortable with, but I do recommend the Decovil Heavy. So you want to make sure you take your interfacing pattern piece. It says tote bag body interfacing and it says cut 2 of the Decovil Heavy. You want to make sure you have the interfacing pattern piece, and you're going to just do this the same exact way that you did for the exterior. So I'm going to use these pattern weights to hold the pattern down, and then I'm just going to trace along the exterior of the pattern. It's really simple, and I'm going to make sure I do this twice because I need one for the front and then I also need one for the back. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and trace these out and then I'll check back in and show you what to do next. Okay, so I have both of my interfacing pieces traced out, and just like we did when we were cutting out the exterior, when we cut this out, we're gonna make sure that we cut on the inside of the line that we traced. So you wanna make sure that you're cutting on the inside and not on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. If you want, you can use an X-Acto knife. Sometimes I do use an X-Acto knife when I'm cutting this out, especially if I'm working with the curve or something. But I'm just going to use scissors and I'm going to cut on the inside of the line. And again, like I said, if you did decide to do applique, you might have to trim this down a little bit more when you go to lay it in the guidelines for the interfacing where it's supposed to sit inside of. You'll kind of see what I'm talking about if it did it when I go to show you the next step. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut these out, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom support interfacing piece. So I'll show you that after I do this. So now I have both of my front and back body interfacing pieces cut out. Really simple, nothing too crazy. And now I'm going to take my pattern piece for the tote bag bottom support interfacing, and I'm going to cut one of these, but I'm going to use Decovil Light instead of Decovil Heavy. And the reason why I'm going to use the light instead of the heavy is just more so of a personal preference, but I kind of recommend it at the same time, is because I don't want the bottom to be too stiff. So I'm going to go ahead, grab my Decovil Light interfacing, which is the same as the Decovil Heavy. It's just a lighter version. It's not as stiff. It still does give shape and stiffness to your piece, just not as much. So I'm going to go ahead, same thing I did for the others. I'm going to put my pattern weight on here. And again, after I trace this out, I'm going to make sure when I remove this pattern piece that I'm cutting on the inside of the line and not on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead, trace this out, cut this out, and then show you what's next. So now I'm at my ironing station, and the reason why I'm here is because I'm going to fuse my interfacing here, but I'm not going to fuse it all the way. I'm just going to kind of heat the backing of the facing up to the fabric so that when I go to use my heat press, it doesn't slide around. Now, if you're not using a heat press, this would be the part where you actually just go ahead and fuse everything down. You wouldn't have to do like a basting fuse. So I'm going to take my body interfacing piece right here, and again, like I said, if you did decide to do applique, especially all over your pattern piece, it may shrink a little bit. Not to worry, don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. It's not going to ruin the project. But if you did maybe like just one little applique, it probably won't affect it that much, and if you didn't do any of it at all, it will not affect it at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line up the bottom part, and so far it's lining up pretty decently. It's not too bad. As you can see, let me show you before I actually start. This is the guideline right here, and I'm making sure that it's sitting inside of the lines that I drew. And again, this is just helping to make sure that it does not get sewn into our seam allowance, because you don't want to sew such a heavy backing in your seam because it will make it really bulky. So I'm just going to go in, I'm using a little bit of steam, and I'm just pressing it just to tack it down so that when I do go ahead and use my heat press, it's kind of stuck down, but not fully, so that it won't slide. So here at the top, I can see that it extends about maybe 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to trim it down. Sometimes when I do this, I get freaked out because I'm like, oh my gosh, the pattern piece is so much smaller than what it is. It's gonna ruin it, da 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 da. And it's weird. I don't find that it ever makes a difference. Everything still fits together. Everything always still sews together how it should be. Okay, so now this is fused to the back. Not fused all the way, it's just kind of tacked down, and it is inside of the lines that we drew. Now, if you're not using a heat press, this is again where you would want to fuse everything. So I would recommend holding your iron on each section for 15 seconds. Use a little bit of steam, hold it, apply a little bit of pressure, and then once you have one part fused, move to the next part, use a little bit of steam, 15 seconds, add a little bit of pressure, and it should fuse pretty decently. So I'm going to set this one to the side, and I'm going to move on to showing you how to do it for the bottom support. Same thing, I'm going to take the decovil light. This one should fit perfectly due to it not having any applique. So I'm going to take the decovil light, and I'm going to just use a little bit of steam and tack it down. Again, if you're not using heat press, this is where you would fuse it all the way. So now I'm going to go ahead, do the other one, and then I'm going to meet you guys at my heat press and show you what I'm going to do next. Okay, so now I'm at my heat press, and I just want to also let you guys know that I do have my heat press set to 335. That's the heat setting that it's on, and I also press for 15 seconds. I just wanted to let you guys know my settings in case anyone was curious on what I use to fuse. So I'm just going to lay this down facing side up, and then I'm going to press it. Really simple. And again, it's going to be pressing for 15 seconds. I'm going to do this for both the front, back, and the bottom support. And this part's really easy. Sometimes I do notice when I do applique that the facing, I might sometimes go in and press it another time just to make sure it's laying nice and flat, because the zigzag stitches can sometimes raise up and cause a little bit of an unlevel surface for the fusing to fuse to. So I just sometimes feel and make sure, and then if it is, I also will go in and take like a little tool. I will use like one of these, and I'll just kind of go in, and you can kind of see the outline of where the zigzag stitches are, and I'll make sure that it's stuck down to the back of the fabric, because the raised stitches can cause an unlevel surface for it to fuse sometimes. So if you did decide to do applique, I would recommend that you do this as well, just to make sure that it is stuck down. And then I like to also turn it around to the front side and give it another fuse, just to make sure that it is going to be on there and stuck down. So I'm gonna go ahead, fuse the rest of my other pieces, and then I will show you what we're gonna do next. All right, so now that we went ahead and interfaced our front and back body pieces with the decovil heavy, it should give it a really nice shape to it and add a little bit of stiffness to the actual pattern piece, which is exactly what we want. So this is the front and the back. So now I'm going to set this to the side, and I'm going to start prepping the straps. So again, for the straps, we cut out 2 of the pattern pieces for it. So you should have 2 3-inch strips of your exterior fabric. The way that I like to do this is with liquid stitch. You do not have to do liquid stitch for this technique. You can either use an iron hemming it to do it that way, or you can use double-sided tape, or you can use the technique that I'm going to do, which is the liquid stitch. So the first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to move this one to the side, is you're going to need a pin to do some marking, double-sided tape, which is what I'm going to use. Again, you don't have to use it. You can use an iron or liquid stitch. I'm going to use my adhesive scissors. These are non-stick scissors so that it doesn't stick. And then I'm also going to grab my ruler. So the first thing you want to do for your strap is you want to mark 1 inch up on each end. And this is going to be our line that we're going to hem to, because the end of these straps have to be hemmed 1/2 inch. So we're going to mark up 1 inch, and when we fold over, it will equal out to be 1/2 inch. I hope that makes sense. But so you want to mark 1 inch on this side and then 1 inch on this side. And then after you do that, you're going to go and mark 1.5 inches up across the center. And this is going to be the center line. So we're going to mark 1.5 all the way across. And again, this is going to be our center line that we're going to use for folding this over. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do, again, you do not have to use double-sided tape. The way that I'm doing it, I like to do it this way. This is just my technique and how I like to do these things. So I'm going to grab some double-sided tape, and I'm going to put some on each end. So I'm going to put some here, and I'm going to put some on this side. And this is going to be so that I can fold this raw edge over, and it's going to stick down. So all I'm doing is I took the raw end and I'm folding it to that line that we just did. I'll do a better example on this side. So you're going to peel the tape off, or if you're using an iron, you're just going to fold up to this line right here. Like that. Really simple and easy. And now it is a clean edge on this side. So now what I'm going to do is, again, you do not have to use liquid stitch for this part. If you want to use an iron or double-sided tape, you can. So I'm going to take some liquid stitch. I personally like to use liquid stitch on my straps because once it dries, it adds a really nice firmness to it, and it also holds everything down and together, and it doesn't, oops, I'm dripping glue. It holds everything down and together. So I'm just going to take some like this. And when I do this, I like to kind of work in sections, and I'm just going to spread it out. I might need to put a little bit more. And the thing with liquid stitch is it's a really strong glue, and you don't need a lot. So if you do decide to use it, just keep that in mind. I'm going to do the same thing that we did when we just hemmed these. We're just going to take this edge and fold it up to this center line. Just like that. And I'm going to do this all the way across and on both sides. And I also like to use this little tool. This is called a fitter's hammer, I want to say. I like to use this to kind of flatten it and make sure it's stuck down and it's not going to be lifting up. I'm just going to go ahead and finish this up, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do next because I don't want you guys to just have to watch me do this. So I'm going to finish this up and check back in. So I went ahead and finished up this side. So I'm literally going to do the same exact thing for the opposite side. Just going to take some of this glue. And then once I have this spread up, I'm literally just going to fold it over to this edge right there. And again, sorry if I'm kind of over explaining simple things. I just want to make sure everyone kind of understands what I'm doing. So we're just going to fold it up right to the edge of the other side that you folded. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead, finish this, and then I'll check back in. So now that I have both sides kind of folded up, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing one last time. Now again, you do not have to use liquid stitch for this. You can use an iron, or you can go in and use double-sided tape. So I'm just going to take the liquid stitch, and you do not want to use a lot because I have noticed sometimes if you use too much, it can kind of bleed. Well, not necessarily bleed through, but in a sense kind of bleed through. So you don't need to use a lot for this part. I'm just going to do little dabs all the way down. And then I'm going to do the same thing and just spread it. And I'm going to fold it up. And when I fold it up, I'm going to fold this end to this end. And I'm going to make sure that they line up nicely. And sometimes when I use the liquid stitch for this, I like to take a little clip on this end just to hold it in place so it doesn't move around. And then sometimes too, another thing that I like to do is if it's needed, I'll add like a little clip just to hold it down in place so that it doesn't lift up or anything. But when you do use clips with liquid stitch, you want to make sure you don't leave it on too long, because as the glue dries, it can kind of leave an imprint or indentation in the fabric. So you want to make sure you don't leave it on for too long. It's just to keep it there for a little bit. Alright, so now I have both of these straps all kind of hemmed and stuff. So what I like to do when I use liquid stitch, if you use this, I do recommend that you do this as well, just to make sure everything is all nice and flat and staying down. So if I use clips, I remove them, and then I will take the same weights that I was using to hold my pattern pieces down, I will take them and I will just lay them across. And I will let this sit for like 20-30 minutes. And I would recommend, if you do use liquid stitch for this part to do the straps, I would recommend that you do this a little bit earlier on in the pre-production process so that it has time to dry and cure, because you don't want to sew these straps while the glue is still wet because it can gum up your needle. So I would recommend doing this about an hour before you even want to start sewing, maybe even an hour and a half, 2 hours, just to give it enough time to dry and stuff. And you also want to make sure you're not using a lot, because the more you use, the longer it will dry, it will take to dry. So this is how you prep the straps, and now I'm going to move on to show you what to do for the bottom support. All right, so now this is the bottom support that we cut out and that I fused the back with Decovil light with. If you want, again, you can use Decovil heavy or heavy backing depending on how stiff you want your bottom to be. Just because I'm using denim and I already used Decovil heavy, I didn't want it to be too stiff, so I fused it with Decovil light. So on here, I accidentally made a mistake. On your actual pattern, it will be corrected and fixed by the time that you have it. I accidentally put fold over ½ inch on the sides. It's supposed to be fold over ½ inch at the top. So on your piece, it will say fold over ½ inch at the top instead of on the sides. So if you did want to do purse feet for your bag, this would be the time where you take your pattern piece and you want to lay it directly on top of this, and you want to mark your holes, and you want to do this before you hem it, because it just makes it a lot easier, because it's this correct size of the pattern piece and everything. Because if you do it after you hem it, the actual fabric is going to be smaller than your pattern piece, is going to be a lot harder to align. So these are the holes that I poked earlier. So if you did want to do purse feet, you just want to take a marking utensil. This is a fabric chalk, and you just want to mark there, mark there, mark there, mark there, and there. I personally am not going to be doing purse feet on this one. I was debating if I wanted to or not, but I'm not. So I'm not going to add markings. But if you did, you would just do that, lift it off, and then your markings would be there. And this is going to make it a lot easier a little bit later on, so that when you do go to add those purse feet on, you already have your markings and stuff. So again, that's for if you're going to do that. So now to prep this. So we're going to hem the top and the bottom of this. So to do that, it's going to be a ½ inch fold over. It's going to be the same. I'm going to do this essentially the same way that I just did for the strap. So this is a 1 inch wide ruler. So you're going to mark a ½ inch up on both ends. So you're going to go like that. Bam, really easy. And I'm going to use double-sided tape for this part. I recommend it because it is the best to use for this part of the process. So I'm going to take some double-sided tape, and I am just going to stick it down and use it to hem the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to stick this all the way across, peel the backing off, and then just hem the bottom edge to the line that we just drew. Really easy. And you want to just stick it down, and you want to make sure this is as straight and even across as possible, because if it's not an even hem, it can kind of look wonky on the right side. But as long as you drew your line straight and you're taking the edge of the fabric straight to the line, it should look decent. So that's just a note that you want to keep in your mind. And then I like to take this little tool, make sure it's stuck down, and as you can see on this side, it is a clean edge, and that's what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same for this side, and now we have a full bottom support. And essentially it's just going to be sewn onto the bottom of the bag, and it's just going to be to protect the bottom and to also hide this seam that's going to be sewn there a little later on. So now that this is done, I'm going to move on and show you how to prep your magnetic snap for the lining. Okay, so now I have both of my lining pieces right here. So we have the front lining piece and the back lining piece. Now before, like I said earlier on, due to the applique, my front and back exterior pieces did shrink at the top about a 1/4 inch. If you did decide to do applique and you don't want yours to shrink, you can do the applique on the fabric before and then cut it out so that you don't have to deal with that. I personally never do that, and I always forget to, and mine's in a shiggy, which to me is never really that big of a deal because I just never really had an issue too much. So because it did shrink a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my lining piece and lay it down And then I'm going to take my exterior piece and lay it on top of this. And I'm going to trim the top to match the exterior so that when I go to sew everything together, it is as even and the same. Now, if you didn't decide to do applique and you just use the pattern straight as it is, nothing, you didn't do anything crazy to your fabric, you will not have to worry about this because your pattern pieces will not have shrunk. Now I have both of my lining pieces cut to the same exact size as my exterior. So I'm going to distinguish between which piece is going to be the front and the back, which right now it really doesn't make that much of a difference because it is both the same. So this is the magnetic snap set that I'm going to be using. It is a flat magnetic snap. Again, you don't have to use a magnetic one. You can use a standard one as long as it's a 18mm snap. So when you buy magnetic snaps, they come in a set like this, and I typically like to take a pair of pliers and kind of pull it apart if it wants to come apart. Sometimes the snap is kind of strong. So this is the male side, and then this is the female side. So typically I like to put the male side on the back piece, and then I like to put, no, the female side on the back piece, and then the male side on the front piece. It's your preference. It really doesn't make that much of a difference. That's just what I personally like to do. So what you're going to want to do is you are going to take your main pattern piece for the body of the bag, which is this one right here. It says the tote bag body. And remember the hole that we punched earlier that says magnetic snap. So you're going to take this and you're just going to set it directly on top. And if yours, if you did what I did and yours shrunk, you want to make sure you're taking the top of the pattern and lining it up to the top of the lining fabric as well. And I'm just going to take a pin and I'm going to add a little dot exactly where that hole is. So now it's a dot right there. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to this side. So now both of the front and back lining pieces have these dots right here. And when you get my snaps, or at least the ones that I use, they come with these little backing pieces. These are the little back supports for them. So you're going to want to take, you see the little center hole right here. So there's three cutouts. So there's a line there, and then there's a center hole. So you want to make sure that the dot that we put is lined up to the center of the magnetic snap backing. And then once it is lined up, you're just going to draw a line where the line cutouts are. That's simple. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the same for this one. Now, I like to use a seam ripper to poke the hole for this. When you do this, you want to make sure you're being very cautious and that you're not applying too much pressure because you don't want to rip above this line. So I'm just going to take the end, the pointy end of the seam ripper, insert it into the fabric, and just rip up. And I'm going to make sure I don't rip past the line that we just did. And I'm going to do the same. I recommend using either a heavy backing or foam. I like to use foam for this part. I'm going to cut a little piece of foam, and this is going to be a little support for the back of the snap, just so that it's not rubbing up against the actual lining fabric, because it can kind of wear a hole down and stuff into the fabric. So I'm just ripping a little square and I'm adding little slits to kind of match that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my female side, sorry. I'm going to take my female side. You see the prongs right here? I'm going to take them, insert it where the slits are that we just put, and now it's to the back. I'm going to take my foam piece. Again, you can use a piece of decovil heavy backing. I'm just going to insert that, and then I'm going to take the back support of for the prong like that. And I like to use pliers for this part. I think it's easier. I'm just going to take the prong and bend it down like so. And I'm going to do the same for this side. And just bend it down. And now we have this side of the snap-on. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same for this side. And this is really easy. It's not difficult at all. Perfect. So now this side of the snap is on. and this side of the snap is on. So this is essentially pretty much it for all the prep before we can finally start sewing. So I'm gonna go ahead and go over one last time all the pattern pieces and things that you should have before we start sewing. Okay, so now that all of the pattern pieces are all cut out and prepped and everything is ready to go, these are all the pieces that you should have. So you should have 2 exterior pieces, 1 front and 1 back. You should have 2 lining pieces, 1 front and 1 back as well. You should have 1 bottom support. You should have 2 straps. And if you're doing a zipper pocket and slip pocket, you should have 2 zipper pocket pattern pieces, and then you should have 2 slip pocket pattern pieces. So these are all of the pieces, and once you have everything ready to go, you can now move over to the machine. All right, so I'm at my sewing machine, and the first thing that I'm personally going to do is attach my name tag. If you are going to put a name tag or a nameplate on your bag, you don't have to, it's optional. It all depends on if you want to or not. I like to put mine on kind of first. It's like the first thing that I typically do. And if you're interested in learning how to make your own name tags with an embroidery machine, I do have a very in-depth tutorial on how I make all of my name tags. I'll link that down below if you're interested in how to do that. So I'm going to put my name tag on here. Again, you don't have to add one of these. I'm personally just doing it, and if you do decide to do it, you can put it wherever you want on your piece. This is just where I'm placing mine. You can put it up here, you can put it down there, you can put it right there. I am just personally putting it here because that's my preference. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this down, and then I'm going to jump in and show you guys what we're going to do next. Okay, so I went ahead and added my name tag on here. Again, it's optional, you don't have to do that. And the first thing that we're going to do, let me move this to the side, is we are going to sew the straps. So what you're essentially going to do is we're going to do a 1/8 inch top stitch away from the edge all the way around. So we're going to go ahead and go over to the machine, and we're going to do a 1/8 inch top stitch all the way around. All right, so I'm at my machine, and the side that I typically like to start sewing down first is the sides where the 2 ends meet. As you can see, they meet here, and on this side it is a clean edge. So I typically like to sew down this side first just to kind of get it out of the way. I don't know why I always do that. So again, we're going to sew this with a 1/8 inch top stitch. So I'm going to start at the bottom, and then I'm just going to go forward. I'm going to do 1 back stitch. And this is a really easy sew. This is just a simple top stitch. And then I'm just going to sew straight down this edge. And I'm going to sew all the way around, and I'm going to make sure my tension looks good, which it does. And then once I get to this end, I'm going to pivot and come all the way back down. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure you're sewing carefully because you don't want to go off the edge of the actual strap. So just make sure you are sewing nice and straight and taking your time. Okay, and then we're going to come back where they meet, and I'm going to do a back stitch. All right, so I finished top stitching this strap, and it looks really nice and clean. It has a top stitch all the way around, which is exactly what yours should have as well. And you're gonna go ahead and do the same exact thing for the other strap. Both of them are sewn the same way. And then after I finish that, I'll come back and I will show you how we're gonna attach this to the actual bag. Okay, so now I have both of the handles top stitched, and they look amazing. So now we're going to go ahead and attach them to the front and back. So to do that, you're going to need to measure out where the handle placements are. And in case you forget or you ever need to go back, on the pattern, it does have the measurement, so you can just measure how far away and how far down this is, and it'll kind of let you know in case you do forget if you ever decide to go back and make the pattern or anything like that. So what you're going to do is you're going to need a marking utensil. I'm using my lovely chalk pencil that I use all the time. So you're going to measure 3 3/8 inches away from the edge and 2 3/8 inches down from the top. Again, 3 3/8 inches from the edge and 2 3/8 inches down from the top. And that is where you're going to put a mark so that you can know where the handle is supposed to sit. So I'm gonna go 3 3/8. and then 2 3/8 inches down. And I'm just gonna put a little mark right there. That's gonna let me know where to place that like that. So it's really simple, really easy. You're gonna do the same thing to this side. 3 3/8 inches away from the edge, and then 2 3/8 inches down from the top. And if you want to make it easier, the strap is 3/4 inches in width. So you can just go ahead and make a 3/4 inch line so that you can know exactly where it starts and stops. So let's make sure this is even perfect right there, and then perfect right there. So that is the measurement and markings you need to make for where the strap is going to be. Now you're going to do the same exact thing for the back side. So I'm going to do that off camera, and then I'll come back and let you know what to do to attach this. So now that I have the markings on here, there are two ways that you can attach these straps to the actual exterior. I'm going to go over both ways, but I'm only going to do one. So if you do not have rivets and then you're not able to use them, or you're just not acquainted with rivets, what you can do is you can do like a box stitch and do like a X. I like to call it like an X box. So essentially you put it here and you sew like a box, and then you do an X in it, and that will attach it and keep it secure. Or the way that I'm going to do it, I'm just going to do a basting stitch only along this bottom row, and then I'm going to use a rivet. And the reason why I'm going to do a basting stitch is just so that it's attached at the bottom, because if I were to only do a rivet, it would kind of lift from the bottom. So I'm going to do a basting stitch bottom and then do a rivet in the center. So if you're going to, I really hope that made sense. The way that I'm going to do it, I'll show you and you'll be able to see. So if you're going to be doing the Xbox stitch method, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to mark 3/4 inches up from the bottom of this strap. So I'm just going to set my ruler right here and mark 3/4 inches up. If you want, you can do an inch as well. It depends on how big and wide you want it to be. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to stitch directly across this line that was marked, and you're going to want to sew like a box. So literally you're going to stitch directly on top of all of these stitches that you put down, and you're going to want to make sure your needle is hitting the exact marking points that it did the first time, so it looks like one consistent stitch. And then after you do a box, you're going to go ahead and stitch diagonally this way and then diagonally that way, and it's going to create an X in the center, and I like to call it an X box. And what that's going to do is it's going to tack it down and secure it, and it's going to be a really strong stitch to making sure this is secure. And you want to make sure you're doing the X stitch while it's laying flat on the exterior. You don't want to just do it singly on the strap. You want to make sure the strap is laying down to the exterior, and then you're going to go across like that and do the X box. I hope that made sense. And the way that I'm going to do it is I am actually going to grab some double-sided tape, and I am going to put some on the back of this. And if you're doing the Xbox method, you can also use double-sided tape. It helps a lot in keeping the straps attached to what you're sewing so it doesn't move and slide around. So I'm going to put it on the back side on the bottom, and I'm going to take this side off. And again, this is where I did my marking, so I'm just going to line this edge of this strap up with the edge of the marking that we made when we took the measurements, and I'm just going to stick it down nice and flat. And sometimes what I like to do too is I like to take a little sewing clip and clip it at the top so it doesn't move like that while I'm sewing it, and it kind of just keeps it in place. And I'm going to do the same thing for this side. Now when you're doing this, you want to make sure your strap is not twisted up like this. You don't want it to be twisted, because then it's going to be sewn wrong. You want to make sure that it's like this, so it should kind of have this nice, you know, cohesive. You can tell when it's the right way. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm not explaining this good enough, but I hope it's making sense. So I'm going to do the same thing. Take the back off, line the edge of this corner up with the edge of the marking that we made, and I'm going to sew. Literally, I'm going to start, let me get close. I'm going to put my needle down exactly where this stitch is, and I'm going to stitch all the way across, and I'm going to stop right at that one. And I'm going to make sure my needle is hitting each individual spot where the needle hit originally, so it looks like one consistent stitch. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to do this. So let me go over to my machine because I feel like I can show better than tell. Okay, so I'm on my machine, and the first thing you're going to want to do when you're doing this method is you want to pull a good amount of the top thread and bobbin thread to the back because you're going to need it. So you want to make sure you have a good amount. And what you're going to do, like I was saying before, I'm going to put my needle, I'm going to make sure the strap is even and straight. And I'm going to put my needle down directly in the first needle hole for the top stitch. So I'm going to put my needle down there like that. And I'm just going to sew straight across each stitch that I already put down. And you don't even have to backstitch for this because I'm going to show you what we're going to do with these extra threads. We're just going to pull them to the back and tie them so that there's no backstitching on the front and it looks nice and clean. Okay, so it's just 4 simple stitches for me. And then when you pull your thread out, you want to make sure you're pulling a good amount of thread again because you're going to need it to pull it to the back and tie it. Right, on this end, there's a good amount of thread, and on this end, there's a good amount of thread. So the first thing we're going to do is you're just going to pull on this thread, not too hard, and you can see it creates like a little loop right there. I'm so sorry, my camera is being so annoying and I feel like it's not showing up good. But all you're going to do is you're going to pull that little loop up, and it's going to bring that thread from the front to the back. So you just pulled that thread that was on this side from the front to the back, and it looks clean. And you're going to do the same thing for this side. So we're going to pull this thread up, and then we're going to pull this to the back. Okay, so once you have the threads to the back, all you're going to do is knot them. And it's really easy. I typically do like 3 knots just to make sure. So 1, 2, and 3. And then what I like to do is I like to go in with my thread burner, and I like to burn the thread and kind of seal it off. If you want, you can use a lighter if you don't have a thread burner, and just seal off the end so it doesn't come undone. And you're going to do the same thing for this side. I'm trying to explain as best as I can. This is the way that I do it. If it's too difficult and you have your own way of attaching straps and doing it that way, you can go ahead and follow whatever method you're comfortable with. This is just the way that I'm showing how I do it. And bam, now it's attached on the bottom only. And then I'm gonna go in and add a rivet right there, and then it will be really secure and attached on there. So I'm gonna go ahead and do up all of the other sides of the straps, and then I'll come in and show you where to put the rivet and how I'm gonna do that. Now that the bottom of the strap is basted down, I'm gonna go ahead and measure out where I wanna put my rivet at. So if you did the Xbox part, you don't have to worry about this because you're not going to be doing a rivet. But since anyone who is doing a rivet, you know, you want to pay attention to this because you want to know, or you can honestly put it your own way. The thing about patterns is they're so flexible, you can kind of play with them and make them your own. So I'm going to measure 3/8 inches away from the edge and 5/8 inches up from the bottom. So 3/8 inches away from the edge and 5/8 inches up from the bottom on the strap. And I'm just going to put a little dot, and that's where I'm going to put my rivet. And I'm going to do the same on this side. And also, you know, if you are using rivets and you don't want to base the bottom of this part, you don't have to. You can just simply attach it through a rivet. So now that I have my hole put there, I'm going to add a clip. I'm going to add 2 clips just to hold this in place so it stays straight, because these straps like to move around, and I want to make sure it's even. And I'm going to take an awl, which is a really sharp pointed tool, and I'm just going to poke a hole right in the center of where I put that dot. And you can use whatever hole punching or method that you use to put holes. Okay, so I went ahead and put my hole, as you can see, right there. And the rivet that I'm going to be using is a 9.2 millimeter rivet with a 12.7 millimeter post. I'm using a longer post, which this is what the longer post looks like, just because it is a thicker area, so I want to make sure that it's long enough to go through. So after I poke my hole, I'm just gonna go ahead and put my rivet in, stick it all the way through to the back, like so. I'm going to grab a cap, put that there. All right, and I'm gonna grab my rivet press really quickly. I'm just gonna go ahead and press this down. And when you're pressing your rivets, you want to make sure your straps are straight and not crooked, because once you press this rivet down, you're not going to be able to adjust them. So that's just one little tip that I would say. Just make sure they're nice and straight. And bam, that looks good. Bam. So now the rivets are on. This is what it's looking like so far. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing for the back, and then I'll come back and let you know what's next. So now that we have the handles on and riveted and attached, or if you did the Xbox method, you have them on and attached, we're gonna go ahead and start sewing this together. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're going to turn this right sides to right sides, and we're gonna start at the bottom. So we're gonna take the bottom and we're gonna line them up. And again, I like to use quilting clips. They work really good. I'm going to add some here, and I'm going to add them all the way across. And essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to do a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew all across the bottom of this. And then I'll see you at my sewing machine. So I'm at my sewing machine, and again, we're just going to sew all along the bottom of this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So you just want to go in, and you want to make sure you do back stitch. And this is a really easy part. This is not difficult at all. I typically would use a matching thread color, but since this is going to be covered, I really don't mind that much. You want to make sure you back stitch. And voila. All right, so I went ahead and sewed the bottom of this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and this is what it looks like when you open it up. It looks really cool. This is the seam we just did right here. So now what I like to do when I'm sewing a bag like this, and it just makes things so much easier, is I'm going to butterfly this seam, which I think that's what it's called. So I'm going to go to my iron, and I'm going to press this seam flat and open so that it lays nice and flat. And then once I do that, I'm going to come back and I'm going to top stitch on each side of the seam 1/8 inch on each side. So I'm going to do 1/8 inch on this side and then 1/8 inch on this side. So I'm going to press this and then I'll be back. Okay, so I went ahead and pressed this seam open. As you can see, it's laying nice and flat, and it also looks nice and flat on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my machine and do a 1/8 inch top stitch on both sides. So I'm back at my machine, and again, I'm just going to do a 1/8 inch top stitch. And essentially what this top stitch is going to do is this seam that we did at the bottom is going to get it to lay nice and flat so that it doesn't, you know, pucker, look uneven. It doesn't cause any weird things like that. And then after we do that, we're going to sew the bottom support on. So it's especially crucial that this is top stitch so that that bottom support lays nice and flat. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the top stitch on here. And I love top stitching. It's one of my favorite parts of sewing. This top stitch, it doesn't have to look 100% perfect because it's going to be covered, but I still like to do my best. So you just want to make sure too that on the underside that it is laying flat so that you can make sure you're stitching it down. So I'm going to go ahead and finish sewing this, and then I'll check back in. Okay, so I now have my bottom top stitch. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to grab the bottom support pattern piece, and what you're going to do is you're going to take this and you're going to fold it in half, and you're going to grab a marking utensil, and you're going to notch this center point, and you're going to do that for both sides. So one on this side, and then you're going to do the same on this side, and then we're just going to find the center point. So now what I like to do is I love to use double-sided tape and liquid stitch for this part. I think it just helps. One, the double-sided tape helps it to stick down while I'm sewing, and then two, the liquid stitch helps it to lay nice and flat, like it sticks it down so that it's actually stuck down to the bottom base of the bag. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and add some double-sided tape to the bottom and top of this. If you don't have double-sided tape, you know you don't have to do this. This is optional. And then I'm going to take my liquid stitch. I'm only going to put it on the part where the decovil is, just because I don't want to put it in the seam allowance. And if you are adding purse feet to your bag and you decide to do this liquid stitch method, I would recommend waiting for this liquid stitch to dry. So I'll give it like 30 minutes to an hour before you decide to punch holes and stuff for your purse feet, just because you want to make sure this glue is dry before you do any of that. All right, so future Rovell here doing a voiceover. I forgot to add in for this clip that if you are going to add purse feet after you sew this bottom support on, that is when you want to add them on. I didn't do purse feet again, so I didn't show that, but after you sew this bottom support on, that's when you want to add your purse feet before you go in and do anything else. So I just wanted to come on and say that. So now that I have this on here, I'm going to go ahead, take the tape off. So now that I have this on here, I'm going to go ahead, take the tape off, and I'm going to take this center point that I marked right here. It's really kind of light and faint. And we don't have to find the center point on this part, because where this bottom seam is in the center, that is the center point right there. So I'm just going to take this and line this notch up with that center point directly in the center. And I'm going to do the same for this side. And that's just going to ensure that it is completely centered. And I'm just going to press it down. And then I like to take, again, the little fitter's hammer and then just kind of like flatten it, especially to make sure that that glue is going to adhere it. And now I'm going to do a 1/8 inch top stitch all the way around this. So it's going to just do a 1/8 inch all the way around. So now I'm at my machine about to top stitch, and I like to start on the side, kind of in the center, and then go all the way around. So this is really easy, and this is, especially if you're using a contrast colored thread, you want to make sure your stitching is nice and neat, because it definitely is going to be noticeable. And I like to sew with my zipper foot. You're probably wondering why. I like to use my zipper foot just because it's a lot easier for me to see when I'm sewing, and because it is the perfect width away from the edge of fabric for a 1/8 inch top stitch. So I went ahead and attached the bottom support on, and it's looking really good. So far, this is what we are working with. So it's looking pretty cool, looking pretty cool. So now what we're gonna do is we are going to sew up the sides. So to do that, all we're going to do is same thing we did for the bottom. We're just going to put these right sides to right sides, and then we're gonna add clips and then just sew a 3/8 inch all the way down on both sides. So I'm gonna go ahead, add the clips on, and then I will see you at my machine. So I'm at my machine, and I went ahead and changed my thread color to the blue, just because I like to kind of match my thread color to whatever fabric color my exterior is, and I recommend that you do that too, just so that the color doesn't poke through the seams, unless that's something that you want. So I'm just gonna again sew down this side with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and it's the same for both sides, the 3/8 inch. And we're gonna make sure you back stitch as well, and sew all the way down. All right, so I went ahead and sewed the side on both of these sides. So now the next step is going to be to closing off the bottom. So these are the bottom corners right here that we have to square off and close. And the way that this bag is designed, or this tote bag, the way that you sew this together is you just pinch it and you kind of meet the two sides together. And what this is going to do, as you can see, is it kind of gives the bag a little bit of width. So it's going to give it some shape to it, and it's not going to be so 2D. It's going to make it more 3D-esque. So all you have to do this again is take it and pinch it. And what I like to do is I like to take the center seam. I don't know if you can see that center seam right there, kind of butterfly it open, and I try to match it with the center seam that we have from sewing the bottom of the bag closed. And then this is where I like to go in and use staples, but first I'm going to add clips just to make sure everything is held in place. So I'm going to clip this side, and then I'm going to take my stapler, which if you have one and you know you are comfortable using it, you can. And I am just going to staple, and you want to make sure you're not stapling in your seam allowance. We're going to sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, so you want to make sure you're not stapling past 1/4 inch. And I'm going to staple this center seam. And this is just to make sure everything is held in place and it doesn't shift while I'm sewing. Bam. So this is what it looks like stapled, and as you can see, it gives the bag a little bit of width and depth to it versus this side, which is still kind of 2D. So now that I have this kind of prepped and ready to go, we're just gonna go in, sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So we're gonna sew with a 3/8. So let's go do that. All right, so again, we're just going to sew straight down this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And this is not difficult to sew at all. It looks a lot more scary than what it really is. So I'm just gonna line this up. And you wanna make sure you're stitching all the way to the edge. So you wanna make sure you back stitch. And you wanna make sure you're back stitching really good too, especially for this part. And we're just gonna sew straight on down. And you wanna make sure when you sew that you catch this, and you want to make sure it's getting sewn down flat, so at a butterfly seam. You want to make sure you sew over it while it's laid down flat. So all the way down, and get to the end, back stitch, and voila, this side is sewn. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. So I went ahead and sewed up the bottom on the sides, and this is what it's looking like. So if you did decide to go ahead and use staples, you want to make sure you remove all of your staples before moving on to any of the next steps. So I just go in, this is a little staple remover, and I just take all of them out. You always want to make sure that if you do use staples that you do take them out and that you do not leave them in. So I'm going to take these out, and then I'll show you what we're going to do next. Okay, so now that we have the exterior sewed together, we can start on the lining. So you should have 2 of the zipper pieces, 2 for the slip pocket, and then 2 of the front and back body pieces. Now, if you don't want to do the slip and zipper pocket, you don't have to do those. You can leave those out. The first thing that I typically like to do when I start on my linings, in case you guys wanted to do this is also optional, is I have my name tag that I like to put on the inside of my bags as well. If you did decide to do this, again, if you want to learn how to make these, I have a YouTube tutorial in depth on how I make them with my embroidery machine. I teach you how to make your own. And yeah, so if you did want to put your name tags on the inside, you can put it anywhere you want. So I'm going to go ahead and put mine on, and then I'll check back in and show you what I'm going to do next. All right, so I went ahead and added on my name tag, but I'm going to move this to the side for now because the first thing that we're going to do is the slip pocket. So all you have to do is take the 2 slip pocket pieces, and you're going to place them right sides to right sides. And then we're going to take some clips or whatever you're using to hold your fabric pieces together. We're going to clip along the top and the bottom. We're just going to sew with the 1/4 inch seam allowance along the top and the bottom of this. We're not going to sew the sides. We're going to leave that open because that's what we're going to use to turn this right side out. Okay, so now that you have it sewn at the top and the bottom with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you want to make sure you do not sew the sides closed, because now we're going to stick our hand through to this side, grab it, and turn it right side out. You want to make sure it's flipped all the way out on both sides. And then you're going to take one side and just push up at the seam. And the reason why you want to push up is because you want to make sure that seam is pushed all the way out. And you're just going to add a clip or something to hold it in place. And essentially what you're doing is you're pushing the seam out. And we're going to do that on the top and on the bottom. So now that you have all of the clips on and you have the seams pushed all the way out, if you're using a fabric that can be ironed for the inside of your lining or the inside of the bag, I definitely recommend pressing because it definitely helps these seams lie nice and flat. So I'm just going to give it a really quick press. And I also like to use this little tool. I call it a bone folder. I really don't know what they're called. And I just press at it while it's warm. And this again just helps the seams to lay nice and flat and look clean. And then after I do that, I'll also go back in and add the clip just to keep it held down. But yeah, I'm just gonna press these and then I will go back to my machine. And once I get there, I will do a 1/8 inch top stitch along the top and along the bottom. All right, so again, like I said, I'm going to do a 1/8 inch top stitch, which is what you want to do all the way around. And this time you do want to close off the sides because we no longer need that to be open. So I'm just going to go all the way around. And with this, again, if you're using, not even if you're just using, you just want to make sure your top stitching is nice and decent, especially if you're using a contrast color thread because it is going to be very noticeable. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and top stitch around the rest of this, and then I'll check back in and let you know what to do next. Okay, so now that you have your slip pocket top stitched, the next part that you want to do is you want to grab your front piece. And I typically like to make sure I put the male side on the front piece just because I personally like the sides that the buttons are on. I think it just has a more cleaner look. So you're going to take this piece in your slip pocket that you just sewed together, and you're going to grab a ruler. And with the ruler, you want to measure 2.5 inches up from the bottom, not this bottom. Let me move this so you can see. You don't want to be measuring from this bottom. You want to be measuring 2.5 inches up from this bottom. So 2.5 inches. And once you do that, you can just add clips on the side to hold it in place. So once you have all of this clipped down, you're going to go to back to your machine, and you're going to baste with the 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then you're going to sew all the way back across the bottom, and then you're going to go back up. So essentially you're just going like this, and you're going to sew. So when I sew the bottom, I typically like to make sure that my needle is hitting the same exact stitch points that I did the first time, so it looks like one consistent cohesive stitch. You don't have to do that, but I just like to do it to make it look nice and cleaner. All right, so again, we're just going to do a 1/8, super easy, back stitch. And then when I get to this bottom part, this is the part where I typically walk my stitches and just make sure that my needle hole is hitting directly where each other stitch hit the first time. You honestly don't have to do this because, I mean, if you want it to look nice and cohesive, yes, do this. But if you don't care, then you kind of don't have to. But I like everything to look cohesive. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish walking these stitches and basting the side, and then I'll show you what's next. All right, so now this pocket is sewed on and it is completely closed off, looks clean. And now I'm gonna take it a step further, which this part is 100% completely optional. You do not have to do this. I feel like I've been saying a lot of the stuff is optional, but I'm gonna turn this into a slip pocket. I personally like the look of it, and I think this pocket is big enough to where if it's divided, it's still enough space on both sides to create a big enough space to hold a good amount of stuff. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to fold this in half, like so, and I'm using waterproof canvas so it creases really easily. So now I have this center line right here, and literally all I'm going to do is stitch down this line, and I'm going to make sure that I backstitch a good amount of times right here to make sure that this is secure. So let's do that. So I have my foot on here lined up with the center mark, and it's actually kind of hard to see, so I'm going to make an educated guess and say this is this in there, which for some reason it looks off, so I'm just going to guess at this point. And I'm going to backstitch a good amount of times because, again, you want this to be very secure in this area because it is considered a stress area. So I'm just going to backstitch a decent amount of times, and then I'm just going to stitch straight down the center with my imaginary line that didn't really crease. And this would be completely easier if you had like marked this with a fabric marker or something so that you had a line, but I'm kind of used to doing these, so it's not too bad. And then same when you get to here, I'm gonna back stitch a good amount. So this is now what it looks like as a divided slip pocket. So you have this section right here, and then you have this section right here. So that is how you do the slip pocket for this. So now we're gonna move on to the zipper pocket portion of this pattern. All right, so to work on the zipper pocket, all the pieces that we're going to need are the two zipper pocket pieces, the side that you're putting your zipper pocket on, and then of course your zipper that you're going to be using. Now to prep the zipper, I typically don't measure out how long I'm going to cut the zipper. I normally just lay it out. I like to use zipper by the yard. I typically lay it out and I just cut bigger than the actual zipper pocket pattern piece just so that I can have enough space to work with, but I will tell you the measurement of how big the zipper is in case anyone wants an actual number. So this is 13 inches. If you're not using zipper by the yard, maybe try a 13-inch zipper, or cut. If you are using zipper by the yard, make sure you're cutting it at 13 inches or however much bigger you want to, but I typically just lay it out and cut it that way. So now I'm going to show how to do the zipper pocket. This is not going to be like a zipper pocket tutorial. I do have a video that I'll link also down in the description box on how to do a zipper pocket, and it is very in-depth. For this, I'm just kind of going to show and give measurements of what it is, where everything's supposed to go and stuff like that. So it's pretty much going to be a tutorial, but I'm not going to go really in depth. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do all that stuff. So let's get into that. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to grab one of your zipper pocket pattern pieces. It really doesn't matter which one. And we're going to take it and we're going to fold it in half so that we can get the center point. Now again, I'm using waterproof canvas, so it's really easy to crease and get creasing lines. So I'm just going to go ahead, crease it down the center, and this is the center line right here. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to grab a pin as well. And I am going to draw 1 inch down from the top, and I'm going at the center line, I'm going to put it at 4 inches. So 1 inch down from the bottom, and I'm going to line it up at 4 inches from the center line because we're going to draw a line that is a total of 8 inches across. We want it to be centered. So we're going to do an 8-inch line all the way across, 1 inch down with the 4-inch mark in the center, like that. Really simple. From this line we just drew, we're going to draw another line underneath this, a 1/2 inch down from the line we just drew. So essentially we're going to be making a 1/2 inch rectangle, I guess you can say. Like so. And then you can just close off these sides right here. Like that. So now we have this really nice rectangle, and we're going to draw little triangles right here on the ends. So I typically don't measure them out, but for the sake of this video, we can do a triangle about a 1/2 inch in from each end. So I'm just going to draw a 1/2 inch in and then just do a little triangle. And this doesn't really have to be perfect triangle. So this is what you should have. Again, you want to make sure you're drawing it 1 inch down from the top of this. And then with the center line that we creased, you want to make sure you're lining it up at the 4-inch mark because you're drawing a 8-inch line all the way across, and you want to make sure that it's centered. And after you draw this line, you're going to do a 1/2 inch down, go down like that, and it's going to create this 1/2 inch rectangle, and then you want to close off the ends. I really hope that that made sense. So now that that part is out of the way, I just dropped my zipper. We're going to go ahead and take the side that you're going to put the actual zipper pocket on, and you're going to take it and you're going to do the same thing, fold it in half to get the center point. And normally, again, I eyeball where I want to have this be. So what I'm going to do is I can still kind of see the center line that I creased on the zipper pocket, and I can have the center line right here. So I typically line up the center lines like this so that they are even and that this is going to be sewn on correctly. Now I typically eyeball where I want my zipper to be on this bag, but since you guys are making the pattern, I have to give the measurements. So I'm just going to measure where this is because I feel like this is perfect. At least for me, because I have a name tag. So You can, again, you can move this around if you want the zipper pocket to be low, if you want it to be higher up, you can, but I'm going to put it here because I feel like it's perfect for where my name tag is. So this is 5 3/4 inches from the bottom. So if you wanted to use the same measurements as mine, you can place your zipper pocket 5 3/4 inches up from the bottom. And I did measure from this bottom all the way down here and not this one. So you want to measure from this one. But of course, if you don't have a name tag, if you're not putting one right here and you want it a little bit higher, I would probably recommend trying to have it closer to the magnetic snap. And then if it's closer to the magnetic snap, it is going to be at 6 3/4 inches. So it's going to be an entire inch up. So after I have this placed, again, I line the center mark up from the zipper pocket to the actual body of the center line that I put on the body. And I'm just going to take these little pins and I'm just going to pin it in place. And this is just to make sure that this is going to stay in place where it is and that it doesn't move. I typically like to make sure I put a pin down here where the center points meet, and typically right here and in all of the corners. So now I'm going to go over to my machine and show you what we're going to do next. Okay, so I'm at my sewing machine now, and all you're going to do is you're going to sew directly on top of this line on the top. So you're going to start at the end, go all the way down, and you're going to stop all the way at this end. And you want to make sure you don't go past any of these lines. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to start all the way at the beginning of this one, stitch all the way down. You're going to stop directly at this one. And we're not going to sew the sides. We're going to leave those open. So I'll show you now what we're going to do. And you want to make sure you are stitching directly on these lines, putting your needle at the beginning and then stitching all the way down. There you go. And an easy way to make sure you're stitching directly on the line is just lining up the line in the center of your foot. Okay, and again, you do not want to go past any of these lines. And we're going to back stitch. Okay, so now that we have the other side done, we're going to go and do the same thing for this side on the bottom. I'm going to start and put our needle where the line begins. Sew all the way down. Alrighty. So now that we have both of these lines sewn, I'm going to give you a close-up look so you can see. As you can see, I stitched directly on top of the line on the top and the one on the bottom. And I just want to make this disclaimer because I didn't make it earlier. When you're drawing out your box, you want to make sure you're doing it on the wrong side of your fabric. And when you're sewing the zipper pocket to the actual body piece, you want to make sure the wrong side of your fabric is facing up. So essentially, you want to put your zipper pocket piece with the body piece right sides to right sides when you're sewing this. So if you have a fabric that doesn't have a wrong side that you can't distinguish between, you're going to figure out what's going to be your wrong side and your right side, and you want to make sure the wrong side is facing up when doing this. And if you, like me, I can tell this is the wrong side of the fabric because, you know, it's like a PVC backing. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind as well when you're sewing this. So now that I got that out of the way, I'm going to take these pins out, and then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to fold this in half again, and then I'm going to do a little slit in the center, and you want to make sure you do this directly in the center and you're cutting through both the zipper pocket and the body piece of the fabric. So this is the little slit that I did, and then from there I'm going to insert my scissors and cut all the way down, making sure that I'm in the center of these lines. I'm going to cut until I get to the tip of the triangle that I drew, and then I'm going to cut down the triangle. And when you cut, you want to make sure you're not cutting into your stitches. Do not cut into your stitches. So then I'm going to go back to this side, snip, snip. Bam. So now we have this cut out where we sewed the zipper pocket to. We're going to take this and we're going to flip it through this hole. So you're just going to push everything through, and I know it may look a little confusing. I promise you it's not as scary as it looks. So you're just going to push everything through the hole that you just cut out. And then I'm gonna take some of these clips and I'm gonna start flipping it. So you wanna take this top piece, flip it to the back, and you wanna make sure the seam is pushed all the way out, and I'm just gonna add a little clip. The same thing, take this top part, flip it to the back, add a clip, and man, and I'm gonna do this all the way around. And again, I do have a full tutorial up on my channel on how to do a zipper pocket. So if you want a video that I take a little bit more time and show each step of the way, you can watch that. I'll have it linked down below, or I'll have like a little card on the screen that you can click and go to. So then when I get to the bottom, I'm gonna do the same thing. Take the bottom part, push it to the back, add a clip. And you're probably like, why did you cut a slit down what you just did? It was so that you can use that hole to turn the whole zipper placement through, if that makes sense. You'll kind of see it start taking shape like the rectangle for the zipper. You'll see it kind of start to look like something. And then when you get to the sides, you don't really have to add a clip. You can just make sure it's pushed all the way to the back. And I'm going to finish the rest of this and I will show you what to do next. So now I'm at the iron, and what you're going to want to do next is you're going to want to remove the clips and iron as you go. So essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to be ironing this bottom seam and this top seam and also the side seams. And what that's going to do is it's going to help it to lay nice and flat, so that it lays nice and flat essentially. So I'm just going to move the clip and press it. And you want to work in sections. You don't want to unclip it all the way because you want to make sure that the seam is still being held down. And you can kind of see the rectangle shape for the zipper insert kind of taking form. And zipper pockets are really simple. They look a lot more intimidating than what they really are. I feel like a lot of people kind of make it seem more difficult than what it is at the same time. So this is now the rectangle for the zipper placement. And sometimes if you want, you can go ahead and iron the back too. I typically don't, but you can. And you want to make sure if you're using waterproof canvas that you're not ironing for too long and that you don't actually let the iron plate of the iron touch the backing, because it will melt it. You don't want to do that. So now I'm going to go back to my machine and show you what to do next. Okay, so now for this next part, I would recommend using some double-sided tape. I love using double-sided tape for this part, and this is 1/8 inch double-sided tape. It's the more thinner one. So what you're going to do is we're going to flip this to the back. So I'm going to take the double-sided tape, cut a piece of it, and I'm just going to place it along this bottom part of this top line right here. So I'm gonna place it there, and you want to make sure you're not placing it too high up, but also not too low. So you want to do it like that right there. And I'm going to do the same for the bottom. And what this tape is going to do is it's going to hold the zipper in place while we sew it down. So now what you're going to do is, I typically like to do it one piece at a time. So I'm going to take the top tape off, or rip the backing of the top off, and then I'm going to lay my zipper like this flat. I typically like to have my zipper pull on the left side so that you can pull it to the right and open it. So I'm going to make sure that my zipper pull is to the left, and I'm going to lay my actual piece on top of it, and I'm going to stick it down. And you want to make sure that the zipper coil is kind of centered in the center of the rectangle, and you want to make sure you have enough room on both sides so that when you go to sew the zipper down, which I have plenty of room, I typically leave the zipper pull out for now and I pull it in as I'm top stitching. I just think it's easier that way, but if you want, you can have it pulled to the center. I typically just pull it through after. So now that I have the top on, I'm going to pull this, lift this up, and I'm going to pull the backing of the tape off and then just kind of lay it back down flat and stick it down. And sometimes when you do this, you might have to adjust the zipper a little bit. It's fine. You can just kind of lift it up and then stick it back down, because again, you want to make sure it's centered, and you want to make sure your zipper doesn't look wonky either, your zipper coil. So now this is stuck down. So we're going to go to the machine and we're going to do a 1/8 inch top stitch all around this. So let's do that. Okay, so if you're like me and you don't like the look of back stitching, especially when you're top stitching, we're gonna do the same thing that we did when we were attaching the handles. You wanna make sure your string is pulled or your thread is pulled and you have a good amount to the back, so that we can pull the threads to the back and tie them off so that it looks like all one clean, consistent stitch. So I typically like to start anywhere in the middle. You can start wherever you want. And we're just going to top stitch this at a 1/8. And if you're using a, well, not even if you're using, you just want to make sure your stitching looks really nice and neat. And then I'll show you how to pull the zipper pull through. I typically leave it out until I get close to the end. So when I get to about right here, I will lift this up and I'll just push the zipper pull through. Really simple. And you see now it's right there. Just pull it through, and you want to make sure you do pull it through because then you will be sewing it out of the zipper and you don't want to do that. And then you can just continue sewing all the way. And this as well is a number 5 zipper. And you want to make sure when you pull your project from under the machine, you're pulling quite a bit of thread as well so that you have enough to pull it to the back and tie it. All right, so now that it is sewn, we're gonna go ahead and turn it to the back, and these are the threads that we left long. And again, you just wanna pull on them slightly, and then there should be, let me show you a little bit more closer up. When you pull on them, there should be these loops that form, and you wanna take a little tool. I like to use a pointed stiletto and just pull it to the back. So that's one. And then that's 2. And now you can see, oops, maybe I didn't pull it all the way. Sorry, I didn't pull it all the way. From the front, everything's pulled to the back. So then you're just gonna knot it off. Again, I like to tie it like about 3 times and then seal it off with either a thread burner or a lighter. All right, so now that we have the zipper pocket all top stitched and in here, this is what it looks like from the front. And you go ahead and open it up. Of course, there's nothing in the back because we haven't put the back side on. And then this is what it looks like from the back as well. So now what you're gonna do is we're gonna grab the other pattern piece for the pocket, and off camera I went ahead and added my own little tag. If you want to do something like this, you can. You just sew it on, and essentially what it's gonna do is when you open up the zipper pocket, you'll be able to see this. It says made by Ravel Gaither. You can have your own little tag. Now what you're gonna do is you're just gonna flip this over like this, and we're going to take our pattern piece and put it on here like so, and just clip. I like to start in the corners at the top. And with this method, I'm going to show you how to sew the zipper pocket so that we're able to have a clean finish on the bottom of the lining. So we're going to leave a hole in the bottom of the zipper pocket, and we're going to use that when we're all done with the bag to flip the lining through, close off the bottom, and then it sounds a little difficult. I'll show you when it gets a little closer. I like doing it this way because you can get a much cleaner lining look. So on this pocket, you're gonna wanna fold it up about a 1/2 inch. I typically don't measure, I just eyeball. If you want, you can measure on the back side so that you can have a hemline. So you just wanna fold it up about a 1/2 inch, and I'm just gonna add little clips right there. I'm gonna do the same for the back side. Fold it down about a 1/2 inch. And then you're going to continue to clip all of the rest of the pieces together. And we're going to leave the bottom of the lining open. I'll kind of show you. I feel like it's not making sense right now. And then I'm just going to add a clip. I'm going to take this off and clip these 2 together. From there. These 2 together. And put that one. All right, so now this is what it should look like. So it's all clipped, and then of course the bottom is hemmed up on both sides all the way around. And I'm gonna go to my machine and I'm gonna show you how to sew this close. Okay, so I'm at my machine, and what you're gonna wanna do is we're gonna sew from the bottom corner around to the other bottom corner. So we're gonna flip this side over, and we're gonna start at the bottom. And we're gonna sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So with the 1/4 inch, we're gonna start from this bottom. Make sure you backstitch. And then we're just gonna keep sewing. And then when you get to this part, you wanna make sure you backstitch when you're sewing over the zipper, just to make sure that it's nice and secure. I like to hit a backstitch, and then we're going to pivot it, and then sew down this way. And then pivot. and sew down this way, making sure to back stitch over the zipper. And then we're going to get all the way to the bottom and then back stitch again. All right, so now that we have this sewn on, when you go to open up the pocket, this is what it looks like. So it has the Made by Gaither tag, and then again, we left the bottom of the zipper pocket open, and we're going to need that so that we can close off the bottom of the bag and have it have a really clean look. Just kind of put it to the side for now. I'll show you later what that is because I feel like it sounds a lot more confusing than what it is. And then this is what it's looking like from the back. Again, it is open at the bottom, and then these are hemmed up. So now the lining is essentially done. As you decided to do a zipper pocket and slip pocket, we can now start actually sewing this together. So I'm gonna go grab my other pattern piece and then I'll show you what we're gonna do next. So now I have the other pattern piece here, and we're gonna essentially do this the same way that we sewed the exterior. So we're gonna place both of these pieces right sides to right sides, and we are going to start on the sides. So we're gonna go ahead and just clip all the way down. And we're gonna sew the sides first before we do the bottom. So I'm gonna clip both of these sides, and then I'll meet you back at the machine to let you know what's next. I forgot to say this, but another thing you also wanna do after you finish the zipper pocket is you wanna cut the ends of your zippers and make them shorter, because you wanna make sure it's not going to be too long and in the way. And then you're also going to want to take a lighter and you want to seal the edges of your zipper. So if you're using a nylon coil zipper, I just take a lighter and just go over it a few times. And what that's going to do is it's going to seal the raw edges so that it doesn't fray and come undone over time. And it's that simple. Okay, so now I'm back at the sewing machine. And when you first start sewing this, you want to start with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So when you're sewing the lining, we're going to start with a 3/8 inch. You want to make sure you backstitch. And the reason why I'm saying you want to start with the 3/8 inch because we're going to increase the seam allowance once we get like a 1/2 inch down. Because with linings, you want to make sure you're sewing them to be a little bit smaller than the exterior so that they fit comfortably inside of the bag. Because if you sew them with the same seam allowance, it can be saggy and too big. So you want to make sure it's a little bit smaller than the exterior. So we're going to start with the 3/8 inch. And then once we get about a 1/2 inch down, we're going to increase it to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now I'm at a 1/2 inch, and I'm just gonna sew that all the way down. Okay, so this side is done, and I'm gonna do the same for the other side. So if you're like me and you're sewing the other side from the bottom up, you wanna start at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you wanna go a 1/2 inch, and then when you get like a 1/2 inch away from the top, you wanna decrease it back down to a 3/8 inch. Only if you're going to be sewing this side from the bottom up. If you're sewing from the top down, you're going to start at a 3/8 and then increase to a 1/2 inch. But if you're starting from the bottom up, you want to start at a 1/2 inch and then decrease to a 3/8. I hope that made sense. So now I'm going to start decreasing to a 3/8. Perfect. So now that we have the sides sewn together, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the bottom and we're going to clip it. And the bottom, we are not going to sew all the way closed. We are going to leave a hole in the bottom of the lining. And this is what we're going to use to turn the entire bag right side out. So we're going to sew the bottom of this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew about 5/8 of an inch in. You want to make sure you're leaving a decent size hole in the bottom of your lining because the bigger the hole, a little easier it is to turn it right side out. But you want to make sure you're at least sewing a little bit more than a 1/2 inch in. I hope that's making sense. So I'm going to go over to my machine, sew this, and then I'll try to show you what I'm talking about. So you want to make sure you backstitch really good for this part. So we're going to backstitch, and we're just going to sew at a 1/2 inch, and we're going to only sew in about 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to stop about, that's a little bit, that's definitely more than 5/8 of an inch. That's like about 1 1/4 inch, but it's fine. And then I'm going to do the same for this side. And again, you want to make sure you backstitch a good amount because there is going to be a lot of tension and pressure on the stitches when we go to turn the bag right side out. So just make sure you backstitch really good. So now that we have the sides and a little bit of the bottom sewn, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the same thing that we did for the exterior, and we're going to square off these corners. So we're just going to go ahead and butterfly the seam. I'm going to add a clip just to hold it open right there. And I'm going to do the same for this, butterfly this one. And I'm going to bring these seams together, and I'm going to line this center seam up with that one so that it lines up really nicely. That's how you're going to know it's centered. And for this one, I'm not going to use staples because these clips typically do not pop off when I sew this portion. And then I'm going to do the same for this side. Also, I just want to talk about how I've been filming this pattern tutorial for like the last 3 days. Filming a pattern tutorial is so stressful because I feel like I'm not explaining really well, which is one of my fears of making patterns because I feel like people won't understand what I'm talking about. But I hope that what I'm showing and what I'm saying is making sense. Now that these are squared off, we're going to sew this down like how we did the exterior, but we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance instead of a 3/8. So we're going to sew this down with a 1/2 inch. Alright, so again, we're going to sew this with a 1/2 inch. And when you're sewing this, you want to make sure that the top and the bottom seam are both laying flat so that they're stitched down flat and there's no puckering or bulking. So you just want to make sure they're butterflied open. And then you want to make sure you're back stitching as well. We're going to sew all the way from one end to the other. So this side is stitched, and then we're going to go ahead and do the same for this side. So now that we have this all sewn together, when you look on the inside, if you can see, you should see that there is a hole in the bottom of the lining and everything is nice and clean and finished off. So what I like to do is I typically like to cut down a little bit of my seam allowance. Now, if you do decide to do this, make sure you are not cutting all the way at the top. You want to start kind of where you started increasing your seam allowance to a 1/2 inch. And the reason why is because when we go to butterfly this seam for when we sew it to the exterior, it's a lot easier if you have this seam allowance left versus if you were to cut it off. So I like to start about a 1/2 inch down and then just kind of snip it maybe like about a 1/4 of an inch. And this is just so that it's not bulky on the inside, and same thing for the bottom, so that the lining sits nicely on the inside of the bag and it's not going to be bulky or anything like that. All right, and once you do that, the lining is now complete. Hey, can we get a round of applause? A round of applause, please. I don't know why I just did that. So now the next step is going to be attaching this to the actual exterior. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and take the lining and we're going to turn it right side out. So you're just going to grab in and turn it right side out. So once that's turned right side out, we're going to take our actual exterior piece and we're going to leave this turned inside out. So this is going to stay inside out, and typically what I like to do is I like to put the handles facing downwards, and then we're just going to take the lining, and you're going to want to make sure that the back side, whichever side that you want to be the back side, that it is going to be facing the back. So like, for example, this is the back of the bag. So when I look inside of the bag, I want to be able to see the line, my name tag and the zipper pocket. So I'm going to face this so that it's facing the back part. I hope that made sense. And once you do that, you're just going to stuff the lining inside with it being right side out, and then you're going to take the side seams right here. So you're going to take this side seam, you're going to butterfly it open, and then you're going to match it up with this side seam, and you're going to also butterfly it open, and you're just going to make sure that they line up nicely. And then I'm just going to add a clip right here, and I'm going to do the same for this side. And I like to start by lining up the side seams first, and then after I do that, I'm just now going to go around and clip everything else. And with this part, I clip it first, and then I go in and then I staple this, because I do notice sometimes that the clips do pop off for this part. So I do like to use staples to hold everything together while I'm sewing so that it doesn't shift or adjust or become out of, place where it's not supposed to be. So I add all my clips on, And then once I have everything all lined up, I go ahead and I grab my stapler and then I just start stapling around. Again, you only want to really do this if you're using a woven textile or if you're going to be doing it well within your seam allowance, because you do not want to sew over your staples or you just don't want to have those perforation holes. So I'm going to go ahead and staple this all the way around, and then I'm going to check back in at the sewing machine and show you what we're going to do next. All right, so I'm at my machine and now we are going to sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So we're going to sew all the way around with a 3/8 inch. And this part, it's simple. You just want to make sure you're taking your time, especially when you're going over the side seams, because it can be a little thick in that area. And when you get to these side seams, you also want to make sure they are flat and open. You don't want to sew them not flat, because then I didn't know how to say that correct, but you just want to make sure they're butterflied open so that everything lays nice and correctly. So yeah, I'm just pretty much going to sew this and then I will check back in and let you know what to do next. So I went ahead and removed the staples, and now that you have your lining sewn to your exterior, now comes the part that most people dread, which is the birthing process, which is where you you flip the entire project right side out through the hole that we left in the bottom of the lining. So typically how I like to start is I kind of like to pull the lining up, and again, this is the hole that we have to flip the project out through, and I kind of start by pulling the handles out first, just to kind of get them out of the way. And this shouldn't be too difficult to birth, because it is a bigger project. Most bigger projects aren't that bad. And I kind of just start by pushing the lining out. So we're going to push the lining out. And the thing about birthing is you just want to make sure you're taking your time. There are going to be times where it feels like it's not going to turn out, or it's just not going to work. Just keep working it and take your time, and eventually, I don't know how, it ends up working out, because there's times sometimes where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just not gonna work, but you just keep working it and eventually something happens. So my facing is kind of lifting and I'm gonna have to press that back down. So once I have that part, I typically like to stick my hand all the way down to the bottom and kind of taco the bottom of it and kind of try to start pulling it up. And again, this is going to take some working there. Your facing might start lifting a little bit from the what should I call it, the fabric. Sometimes that happens, but typically when I go to give my bag a final press, it just sticks the facing right back down. And when you're doing this too, don't worry about ripping, because I used to be scared when I was doing this, like, oh, I'm gonna rip the bag, because sometimes it feels like you are going to. But as long as you use a really strong thread like the bonded nylon or bonded polyester, you shouldn't have to worry about that. Now that the lining is flipped out, I can start grabbing actual bag and pulling it through, which looks gorgeous. And sometimes I'll also stick my hand back in the lining and push from the inside, push outwards. But if you've ever made a bag and you've birthed a bag, you know how this process can get. So yeah, once I have this flipped out, I will check back in and show you what to do next. Okay, so now that it's all mostly, well, it is flipped out, I will take the lining and just push it down inside of the bag like this. Just push it all the way down. Really simple. And then I'm going to show you what to do now. Okay, so now the next step is we're going to push this top seam up and out so that everything is laying nice and flat. So what I like to do is I like to open up the bag, kind of go back in under the lining through the hole that we left in the bottom. And you can kind of see my hand. I like to push against this seam to make sure it's pushed out nice and flat. And then I'll go and add a clip. And I like to do this all the way around just to make sure it's pushed out all the way, so that when we go to top stitch, everything looks nice and neat. And if your project is wrinkly at this point, don't worry about it. Again, if you're using a fabric that can be ironed, I typically worry about that at the end when I go to press my bag to get any wrinkles or stuff like that out. So I'm gonna go ahead, clip all the way around, and then I will show you what to do next. Okay, so I have the top all clipped, and now what I normally like to do is for the side seams where we sewed the sides together, this is typically the thickest area for this part. I like to grab a pair of pliers and just kind of clamp it down just to kind of flatten it out, or you can hammer this. I typically just use the pliers because it works pretty decent. And I do that for both sides, and it just helps so that when I go to sew over this, it isn't too thick and bulky and difficult to sew over. And then another thing that I like to do, of course, you do not have to do this. This is what I do, and I probably wouldn't recommend this if you're not using a woven textile. But I like to use a stapler. Again, I love using a stapler to staple the lining to the actual exterior so that it does not slide and move around or come up while I'm top stitching it. It just helps to hold it down in place where I clipped it so everything just looks the best that it can. So this is what I'm going to do all the way around. So I'm going to clip this, and then I'll meet you back at the machine, and we're going to top stitch the top of this with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm at my machine, and I'm just going to kind of squash this to get it under. And a lot of times I kind of like to start at the side seams. So I'm just going to start like at a side seam, I guess. Again, this is going to be a 1/8 inch top stitch away from the edge. I'm going to leave my threads long enough because I do want to have a clean stitch. So I'm going to pull my threads to the back. So if you want to do that, make sure you have enough thread space. And yeah, I'm just going to start sewing. And with this, of course, if you're using a contrast colored thread, you really want to make sure the stitching looks up to par because it's going to be 100% noticeable. And there may be some instances where it is a little awkward to sew, but definitely make sure you're taking your time and sewing as neat as you can. But yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and finish top stitching this, and then I will check back in to show you how to close off the lining. So now that the project is all top stitched and everything is pretty much done, we're now going to close off this hole that we have in the bottom of the lining. Now remember that hole that we left in the bottom of the zipper pocket? Well, that's what we're going to use to flip everything out and turn. But if you decided to not do a zipper pocket on the inside of your lining, if you didn't do that, what you want to do to close off your lining, all you're going to do is you're going to pull it out, and it's already going to kind of fold over because we did sew a little bit with the like a half inch in. Well, actually I sewed more than half an inch, but you just want to flip each side over like this. And then you're just going to add a little stitch to close off the bottom of the lining. Now, I typically don't like doing it this way because, again, like I was saying earlier, it does leave a hole, not a hole, it does leave a stitch line in the bottom of your lining, and it is very noticeable, and I typically do not like the look of it. So if you didn't do a zipper pocket, you would pretty much just do this and then just go to the machine and do a 1/8 inch stitch along this edge, and then just push it back in, and everything would be done and finished, and your lining would be closed off. Now, if you're going to do it the way that I'm doing it, you're going to open up the zipper pocket. There is a hole which is right here in the bottom of the zipper pocket. So this is the zipper pocket right here. So you're going to reach in through the hole of the zipper pocket, and you're going to grab the bottom. You're just going to grab the bottom of the bag, and you're going to pull it through the zipper pocket hole. And by doing that, you now have access to the bottom of the lining. Now, I hope that made sense. As you can see, the lining is pretty much pulled through the hole that we left in the zipper pocket. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to add clips to close this off. And then we're going to go to our machine and stitch the bottom of this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way across. So I'm going to finish clipping this, and then I will sew this with a 1/2 inch. Okay, so I'm at my machine. This is the stitch right here that we did, or this is the stopping point that we stopped, or that I stopped at when I was sewing the bottom of the lining together. So I want to start right there and go all the way and stop at this end right here, which is also where I stopped when I was sewing the bottom closed. Really easy. Again, we're sewing this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you do want to make sure you backstitch for this part. So we're going to backstitch, and sew a 1/2 inch seam. And then again, when we get to this part, we're gonna sew all the way to where we stopped, and then backstitch. And then what I like to do is I like to trim the excess off the bottom. So I'm just gonna trim this excess. Again, trimming the excess is just to help it lay nice inside of the bag so it's not bulky. You want to make sure you're not cutting any of your stitches. And then I'm going to show you what to do now. So now that the bottom of the lining is nice and closed, we're going to go ahead and push the lining back through the hole of the zipper pocket. I'm going to push it all the way down. And then you want to make sure that it is nice and closed and everything looks decent. So now you can see this is the bottom of the lining and it is closed nice and clean. So we're going to push that back down. And then this is the zipper pocket right here that we left open. So what we're going to do is we're just going to fold these ends over. We're going to essentially do the same thing that I showed earlier for the people if they didn't add a zipper pocket. So we're just going to fold these ends. And it is already a little easy to fold over because remember it was kind of sewn folded up, so it makes this part a lot easier so you don't have to guess how high to fold it up. So now that this is clipped together, we're going to go ahead and go to the machine and we're going to top stitch this with a 1/8 inch top stitch. All right, so now we're going to start sewing, and you want to make sure you're going all the way from one end to the other. And you want to make sure you're back stitching as well. And another tip too is you want to make sure that both edges from both sides are lined up nicely with each other, just so everything looks really nice and lined up. Okay, so now that the bottom of the zipper pocket is closed, this is what it looks like. So now we're just going to go ahead and push this back inside of the pocket. And you want to make sure it's pushed all the way down. And there is going to be a little seam on the inside of the zipper pocket towards the bottom, but honestly, it's not even noticeable. And it's much better having it inside of the zipper pocket versus on the bottom of the bag. And I just like to make sure I'm pushing in all of the corners so that it's sitting nicely in the bag. So now this is what the bottom of the zipper pocket looks like. And now I'm going to close this up. And I'm going to push the lining all the way down and make sure it is snug in the bag. And then this is what the bottom of the bag looks like. Nice and closed off as well. So the last and final step that I have to do is just press this bag and give it a good and final press. So I'm going to go ahead, head over to the iron and show you how I like to press the final part of the bag. Alright, so this is the last and final step if you're using fabric that can be pressed or ironed, is pressing it. And this is really what typically brings the bag to life, and you know, it's like the final little step to kind of add, you know, just a last little nail in the coffin. So I'm gonna go ahead. I like to use this little tailoring hem. I don't know if it would be called a tool, but it's a tailoring hem. I like to use it for the inside, and I just go ahead and iron with a little bit of steam. And this just helps to get any little wrinkles out and things like that. Also, if any of the facing lifted up, it will kind of heat it back up and help it to stick back down. And then I'm going to press these side seams right here as well, just to get those to lay nice and flat. And this is one of my favorite parts too. I typically will not judge a bag until after I've seen it pressed, because it makes such a difference in just the overall outcome. Like, pressing is so crucial. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to take this corner, make sure it's pushed all the way out, and I'm going to pinch it like this. I hope the lighting is good. I'm gonna pinch it like that and then just press it like so. And that's just gonna help this corner to sit out nicely, and I'm going to do the same to this side. So I'm going to push it out and then press. And then I also like to press the bottom just to make sure everything is nice and pristine. And then another thing that I like to do too is I like to press the handles or just iron them just to make sure, because sometimes they can become a little wrinkled from all the pulling and tugging and all of that stuff. All right, and that is the last step for this tote bag. So yeah, this is a tutorial for how to put together your own grab and go tote bag. I love how this bag came out so much, and honestly, it is a really easy and simple sew. I feel like because the video is kind of long that it might make it seem a little bit more difficult than what it really is, but this is a really simple sew. I do feel like a beginner could tackle this project. But yeah, it's just a simple tote bag, came out really lovely. So if you are interested in the pattern for this, it is linked down below, or you can go to my website, rovelgaither.com. It's retailing for $12. I am also going to be selling this bag. Depending on when you're watching this video, it may or may not be up, but yeah, so that's really it. I feel like this video is so long, so I'm gonna make this outro short. I thank you guys for watching all the way to the end. If you have any comments or questions or anything, please leave them down below in the comment section. And yeah, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up. Make sure you leave a comment down below like I just said. Make sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification so that you can be notified when I upload any other videos and tutorials. And I thank you guys for watching. Deuces.